OTB AM.
The Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball.
Very welcome along to OTB AM, the Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball. It is Thursday, it is August the 3rd, it is 7:30, and we're with you live until 10 o'clock this morning. Loads to come between now and 10 o'clock. We have Cameron Hill beside me. Cameron, good morning.
Good morning.
And a very special guest, co-host, Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. Dan, good morning.
Thanks for that intro, Shane.
There was only one title for it, really.
Special, yeah.
I mean, we could have put Irish Independent maybe under your name, but we'll just go special guest, co-host.
Listen, I'm happy to work with it. Yeah,
it works. Louth's finest. Where we've got Louth. I always I know it's Mayo.
Yeah. But say Mayo then.
It's just the accent puts me off, Dan, you see.
Listen, I'm used to that myself, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
You know? Well,
there's a twang, there's a
little bit. I think if you're northeast, as you are yourself, you sort of recognise you recognise it a little bit.
Yes.
You can recognise a little bit of twang, but to most people, you've probably sold out.
It's RD you're from.
Yeah.
See, yeah.
Don't have the RD accent in the sort of the purest sense of the word.
RD's not as strong as Dundalk, though, is it? It's different.
It depends. Yeah, depends. RD, Dundalk and Drogheda, you have three different accents there in a very small radius.
Drogheda,
trying to explain this to people. You know, it's like, how can this small county produce so many different ways to work the English language?
It's true.
It can happen.
Yeah, because there's lads there in South Monaghan in a skene very close to the Louth border, and it just meshes into one. The accent is so similar.
My dad's from Louth, and he doesn't have a very strong accent, but that's my mum always says that if he did, she wouldn't have married him.
Right. Well, what part of Louth?
Dunleer.
Oh God, that's the fourth part of the county.
Just off the motorway.
That's the lesser spoken part of Louth. Yeah. Dunleer.
Yeah.
God,
but they're not showing off.
Well, Rob Carney's from Louth, and Dave Carney.
That's it.
And I mean, I think those lads maybe lost their accent a little bit along the way.
Went schooled in Louth, were they?
They weren't. Oh, sure, of course. You have the rugby.
I don't believe so.
No, we'll not have it. I was distracted yesterday evening, lads. I usually be sending texts back and forth, production texts, and kind of getting involved in the production of the show.
Much more involved usually. I
sat in a dark room for 3.5 hours basically. Oppenheimer in the cinema last night, IMAX. What experience, by the way. Like the biggest screen. I think it's the biggest screen in the country there in Purnell Street in Cineworld. But it was an unbelievable film. I saw Barbie last week, so Dan is out of the loop here, Cameron. This is it's very pop culture.
Yeah,
it's very current. It's very off the time. It's very in.
Yeah, my brothers went and did Barbenheimer.
Did they one after the other?
One after the other. So they went and my brother wore a purple suit with a pink tie, and went to Oppenheimer first, then went for pints, then went to Barbie.
Oppenheimer first,
and then Barbie as a palate cleanser.
Yeah, so you can do that a bit tipsy.
Yeah, he was delighted the way it turned out. He really enjoyed Oppenheimer, and he said he really enjoyed Barbie, but then he wasn't of sound mind at that point, so
of course
I can't for sure.
Do you know what?
I genuinely have no idea. I see a lot of references to Oppenheimer, and you just realise you've completely lost touch with I've missed that whole strand of society that go for a movie double header with points in between.
Yes,
I've just lost touch with how people recreationally choose to spend their time.
Well, you're watching different sorts of things at home.
Well, it's not even that. Well, I mean, obviously Paw Patrol,
of course.
Yeah, I can speak about that if you want. I mean, plot wise, not 3.5 hours, shorter episodes, maybe repetitive, but I genuinely have no idea what Oppenheimer is about.
So the reason these two films have become culturally linked,
I want to explain it to me
is
here,
because they're released on the same day by chance, and they are so unbelievably different. Well, I mean, you couldn't have picked two different themes, so people were like, this is hilarious. These two films are released on the same day, so they both benefited from each other releasing on the same day, because Barbie fans went to Oppenheimer, Oppenheimer fans went to Barbie. So J. Robert Oppenheimer was the father of the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
That explains why some atomic bomb related social media content was coming up.
That would
there was an interview, I don't know if you saw that thing, was it This Is Your Life show from America 10 years or so later, where a Japanese person was introduced to one of the pilots.
Oh yes.
And now that's the context for that.
That's it.
And it was they brought out the pilot who then who sort of in that awkward stilted style, meeting someone for the first time.
Oh wow, yeah.
Discussing how they felt on that day.
Paul Tibbets, I think, was the Enola Gay pilot. That was the plane that dropped it in Hiroshima. But the film's mad. It's 3 hours. It's just Cillian Murphy plays Robert Oppenheimer.
That's why he's popping up everywhere.
That's why he's popping up.
That makes sense.
Like
all these
not in Barbie, to be clear.
He's not in Barbie, but it's an all-star cast in Oppenheimer. You've got like Matt Damon, you've got Emily Blunt. Who else you have? You've got
RBJ,
Robert Downey Jr.
RDJ.
Yeah, you've got not Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
No, different.
Rami Malek, great show.
Malek is in it.
There's some unbelievable actors in it. Who else is in it? Brad, no. Producer trying to catch me out. He says Brad Pitt, but Brad Pitt's not in it, so I'm not going to say his name.
You watched it last night, Shane.
I watched it last night.
Remember.
I know it was excellent. And then Barbie is totally different. It's like Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling, shut your brain off time. But there are a lot of themes in it, like kind of important. You've seen it, haven't you?
Is the whole point that you have to showcase that you're a more rounded individual by watching both, and you can't watch one without the other. And if you just watched one,
yes,
then you're obviously conforming to some stereotype that you're just not. You're not open.
That's
you're basically not open to it. So you have, there
was a probably more men at Barbie than otherwise would have been. So, but I don't know if Barbie would have been a film that I otherwise would have went to. But I was like, I'm going to do both.
You're a modern man.
Modern man.
They've a point to prove by going to Barbie as well.
Maybe.
Whereas Paw Patrol the movie is the synthesis.
Yes.
Of those two ideas.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. But I'm into my history and stuff. So Oppenheimer, I thoroughly enjoyed. It's if you're into history, like obviously.
I know. I probably will. I'll see it in 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, exactly when it comes out on. But it's one of these. It's obviously about the atomic bomb. So there are. This is not exactly a spoiler. There are some loud moments, and some
brilliant.
Some sensory overload moments that I think would be best served on a massive IMAX screen.
Okay. I'd say it was intense.
It was very intense.
Yeah.
There's a moment in the middle. I won't spoil it, but it's like. It's very, very intense.
Someone farted.
You almost went into
vacuum.
That wasn't the intense moment, by the way.
When you nearly went into a Graham McDowell movie review there.
Yeah.
I feel like Graham McDowell should be reviewing Barbie and Oppenheimer.
Many moments to choose from. Well, his favourite movies, of course, would be Gladiator and Shawshank Redemption, but we won't go down that path. I won't be at Oppenheimer tonight. A lot of people in Dublin won't be at Oppenheimer tonight. This is the worst segue of all time, but the Irish team are homecoming tonight instead. That's what we're all going to be at.
Coming home even.
Coming home.
A team would probably feel like spending 3.5 hours in a darkened room.
Is it going to be an awkward homecoming because of the whole Vera Pauw, Katie McCabe thing? Like, is that?
Well, I don't know what they've got planned for it. I haven't followed it, and I mean, generally, these homecomings are like terrible. Really, but like a great occasion for people to go and see them, and it's about like the kids and having them out on stage. But like, I'm thinking of previous ones with Joe Duffy sort of interviewing people sort of after the World Cup 2002, and it's all very stilted. So like, I don't know what they've got planned for it. But I think it is probably going to be a lot of body language reading and watching. And I suppose I don't know how it was ever going to be any other way, given things that happened in a very high profile way the other day.
It's going to be, I'm just looking up the details of the homecoming. So 6:30 this evening on O'Connell Street, just in front of the GPO. Entertainment, you've got Block Rock and Beats DJ Dick Pierce from upstairs. Dave Murr is the MC from Today FM. Beckett Bridge will have a special Koi gig message this evening as well. It doesn't really say exactly what else is involved, but people want to go down, they can, and observe body language and try and it's all a bit strange, isn't it, the contract situation with Vera Pauw. It's like, in a footballing sense, I don't think anyone would disagree that she probably deserves one, but there is the distraction of all the accusations from the Athletic piece, and I mean, there's her relationship with the players. We don't know exactly how she gets on with some of the squad, but clearly there was a little bit of tetchiness between herself and her captain.
Yeah, well, I think the one thing I would say about the modern FAI is that they actually do tend to work quite slowly on contracts as well. Now, it might have actually, maybe it might work out for them here in the sense of, is it possibly the case that with all the water that's gone under the bridge in the last couple of weeks, that suddenly you may decide to go a different way, and maybe like the fact that they, the euphoria of qualification didn't convince them to throw out the contract, then clearly there's reservations. But it is just worth stressing that point. Like, even when Stephen Kenny's new contract was agreed, it was months before it was actually, or it was agreed that he would stay. It was months before it was signed and done. Jim Crawford, on 21 manager, was left in limbo for ages. It was extremely bizarre, and there was never any doubt about him staying on. So they don't necessarily speed through these things in contrast to the FAI's past, where they would they would sort of chuck them out, after a good night. So I think it's clear, though, from reading the reports and listening to the reports of the people who were over there on the ground over the tournament, I suppose the mood music all seems to be going in a particular way, and they wouldn't be taking a stab at that.
Yeah.
There's clearly the vibe around the place would reflect that maybe you've reached this natural end, and I suppose when things like people would say now, oh well, this whole thing on Monday is it's overblown, it's completely, and I understand the nature of people to say that people are trying to create a story from nothing, but you step back from it and it is highly unusual.
Yeah.
You have your most high profile player at a time when you're trying to pretty build on this and grow the game, and you're going to have Kate McCabe front and centre, and if you have a manager saying things in a press conference that are sort of escalating a situation, then you have the player doing something on social media, maybe in the forum of a sort of a happy clappy homecoming. Everything is put to the side, and there's sort of great sort of gestures and cheers and everything, and that's absolutely fine. But that's unusual. There's no doubt that's unusual.
The questioning around Paro before she left was unusual too. Like the question around, are you going to the homecoming, was very strange, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Kathleen pointed it out herself, and they spoke about it on the World Cup show, that it was there must be something else there, because why would you ask that? I'm the manager, of course I'm going. There's just this cloud of mystery and intrigue around all this, I think.
Well, since the moment they qualified and that song became they sang in the dressing room became a big issue, there just seems to be something following this team around. Like, you're never more than 5 minutes away from another controversy, and I'm not saying it's the team's fault whatsoever, it's just there always seems to be something. And maybe heading into a big tournament, people lean in more to these storylines, and I understand that, and maybe we wouldn't be making a big deal out of Katie McCabe asking for a substitution. Like, maybe Vera Powell naming the player, naming Sinead Farrelly was a bit
There's a lot
strange.
of things. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, I've sat through a lot of press conferences over the years where a player is asked about, do you want your manager to stay on? And even if they maybe don't want them to stay on, they will come out and say, of course.
What are they going to say?
We always say that. What are they going to say? And like, it's actually been one of the things that has probably worked even, I think, for Stephen Kenny at times, has been the real emphatic nature of the player support, where they've gone that bit further than given the platitude. And actually, like, Matt Doherty and people going a bit further and saying, no, the preparations, everything was very good. And in that context, I do find the very non-committal answers of all the players to be kind of interesting. Like, it's amazing to me that at some point, no player has felt the need to say, well, of course, we'd love to continue the work we're doing with Vera, and qualify for the next tournament. It's the easiest thing in the world to say.
Yeah.
Like, if someone says it, we sort of forget they've said it 2 minutes later, and you just go, yeah, whatever. Like, there's press conference talk, but not one player has really gone that way.
We wouldn't forget them saying it if they said it now. Now we'd be like, well, Jesus, right, that's a backing.
And like, it's hardly, is it a PR strategy? Has someone given them briefing notes to say this is what you say in response to this? I don't know, but like, it's to me, at times it can all seem very benign, and again, people are trying to find a story that isn't there. But like, you step back from that stuff and you look at the interactions and how people generally interact in that sort of football setting, and you see things there that are all forming a sort of a strange pattern, which makes you think there's something lingering behind it.
There's a YouTube comment in from Shane. Feels harsh. Why are we having a homecoming for a team that finished bottom of the group? The men's team didn't get one after Euro 2012, and rightly so.
Yeah, it's their first time, I think. I don't have an issue with it. I think if they get to the next Euros and exit in the groups, I don't think there should be one. But I think, like, to reflect, the historic nature of this, I don't particularly have a problem with it. I think the nature of even how things happened last October, you could argue like they didn't necessarily get that moment. I know there was people greeting them at the airport and stuff like that, but I don't have a mad problem with it. But obviously, again, yeah, I think it's because you only have the first time once, and I think that's probably the argument for it.
Yeah, and I don't think it's that grim. Like I saw a video yesterday of the Kerry homecoming at the weekend where they'd arranged, obviously in Killarney and Tralee, the players coming off the bus, and it was a bit like a wake.
Yeah.
You know, like Kerry obviously in a final expecting to win, hoping to win. So I don't think the Irish homecoming this evening is going to be quite like that. As you said, it is a World Cup, it's a moment to celebrate.
Yeah, conspicuously empty plinth.
It would be. Yeah.
On which the World Cup would have sat.
Yes. Yeah, just sitting there. So it'll be strange, but as you say, it's a first World Cup. I think it's fair enough. Keep the comments coming in. Edward Freeman says English managers treated awfully by the English press down the years. Stephen Kenny and now Vera Pauw suffering the same stick and disrespect from journalists. Some of the questions of the World Cup were a joke. You have to ask these questions at the end of the day.
I didn't hear any questions to me that struck me as unreasonable.
No,
and also I will say that, like, yeah, Vera Pauw very much controls the tone of her press conferences. It's actually something she's very good at. She's a very good communicator in that setting. Look, I mean, this just sounds self-serving. It's like, oh, here's a member of the media saying the media aren't asking bad questions. But I don't, like, there have been times, you know, maybe at times even in the Kenny stuff where I wouldn't have been mad maybe on aspects of things. But I think a lot of the tougher questions that have been asked of Vera Pauw, like, should have been asked at various times. I mean, during this World Cup, I mean, there has been some mad things happening. You know, the Colombia game and what happened before that, and you know, that being called off and injuries, and again, like, you know, there was a high-profile investigation that she actually was sort of keen to happen, I suppose, in a way. So, I think you have to go there.
Someone else has commented as well saying, this is Strawberry Boba. Good morning, Strawberry. Where's Shane's Dublin jersey? Now that he lives in Dublin, he must support them now, according to his own logic. Or is this one-way logic? Strawberry, if you were listening to me yesterday, this is all over. So there was a video, we were talking about it yesterday, in Ashburn, at the G8 club in Ashburn, in the bar. We're all watching. They had a bit of a party to watch the All-Ireland final. Similar party, I'm told, happened for the Tottenham Cup final with Meath taking part. But this All-Ireland watch party, Dublin versus Kerry, in the Ashburn County Meath G8 club, was plastered with Dublin jerseys. So I'm not saying that Dublin people who have moved to Ashburn to live, fair enough, commuter belt, a little bit cheaper than Dublin City, I'm not saying that they should now be Meath fans. What I'm saying is it's an organised event in the G8 club, and there's not a Meath jersey. And not that they should be wearing Meath jerseys, but I'd imagine Meath people wanted Kerry to win at the weekend. I'm not saying that because we're not all Dublin fans now that we live in Dublin. That's fair enough. I'm not going to tell people who to support. I just think it was a funny one. I think it'd be like what's the equivalent in Mayo?
Ballahadreen,
basically.
They were all wearing Roscommon jerseys.
I mean, it's similar lines.
Yeah, but it's tough when you see, like, I think I've had this before. There's a couple of footballers who are from Ashburn direction, and you sort of you refer to them as like the Meath native or something, and it's
feels wrong.
Not well. Like, where would you say, like, you know, where are the allegiances of like Nathan Collins and Evan Ferguson? They're actually routinely mistakenly referred to as Dubliners.
Dublin people. Yeah.
But actually,
Evans,
they're both Kildare, Kildare and Meath.
Yeah.
And like Mark Travers is another one. He is more Kildare, but like this generally tends to happen. You'll see a lot of references to Nathan Collins, Dubliner. But I sort of asked, it's like, well, they're league slip, and they sort of straddle both sides, you know. And it's
the train goes out there. Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean,
yeah, it's the accents. I think people get confused with the accents. Should we start referring to footballers as from the Pale? Footballer from the age 24 from the Pale.
I don't know, historic mess to untangle there. I think
could be controversial. Yeah, could prove controversial. Shifty lad, morning, Shifty lad. He says, did Vera's Dutch demeanour come across as tough for the players? Straight talking, should be admired. Yeah, like maybe that, and it's a personality thing. I'm not necessarily saying it's just her nationality, but it's her personality, generally speaking. She is blunt in press conferences. Tony O'Donoghue asked her a question the other day about the contract situation, and she replied with one word and left it at that. And even the way she said, Katie McCabe's not the manager I am, or not the coach I am, she didn't have to say that. That was proffered by herself.
Yeah. So
there are maybe just little things from her press conference that just like that's just Vera. Do you know, if this was you know, Stephen Kenny mightn't maybe go as far sometimes in press conferences, although sometimes he wants to get his point across and he'll speak for 4, 5, 6 minutes. And
no, but if your player was sort of remonstrating them to make substitutions, it would become a massive story. You know, if that was the case, and it would be portrayed in a particular way. So yeah, I think some people, there will be people out there who like that bluntness from, and their personality will naturally lean towards that. They like that type of management, and then there obviously the conflicting view will be, I suppose sometimes you might have with these managers who can be quite intense and blunt, and this extends to all codes, and you can think of like the strong characters that go that further. Sometimes there can be a shelf life to that.
Yes.
That the voice is very effective and achieves a goal, but do you eventually reach a point where maybe that loses its effectiveness? And sometimes, like, you know, it wouldn't be the first international team that, like, just a length of time away for a major tournament. It's very different to anything you do during a qualifying campaign. You might be together for 10 days. You know, that was a big thing with Trapp in Ireland in the Euro 2012. Like, the longest they'd been together prior to that was probably maybe 8 days, 10 days in a training camp, and all of a sudden it's 5 weeks, and by the end of it, it was sort of done. Yeah. But the contract was already signed, and the thing sort of limped along for another year.
This, we've already mentioned Evan Ferguson's name, but John O'Leary says in the YouTube comments, any concerns that Evan Ferguson hasn't started a pre-season game for Brighton with Welbeck and Joao Pedro starting ahead of him?
No, I wouldn't. Like, I think with Ferguson, it's the second season though. Like, it's first full season, really. You know, like, he only broke in halfway through last season, so I wouldn't get carried away with it. I think, like, you know, the management may look to do things with a player in a particular way to sort of, I think even last year they were quite good. Like, he wasn't playing every game. They took him out of the firing line at times and they rotated him. But it's true. Like, I think with Evan Ferguson, there's such an obsessive focus on him now that, like, if he doesn't start a game, it'll prompt a crisis, when, like, he's way ahead of every average and every sort of metric of where someone would be. I wouldn't be too concerned, but I mean, it was mentioned to me by someone the other day, right, that was the case. But you just don't know where people are at in pre-season. There could be, like, he had a sort of an injury interrupted still, like, second half of last season. You know, with everything that happened, he still had a couple of injuries, and they might just be monitoring that.
On Irish football, Shamrock Rovers and Ferencváros, this is going to be an exit from Europe for Shamrock Rovers, let's be honest.
There's no need to dwell on that one too much.
But we could dwell on the money. Like, so they made over 3.5 million in UEFA money last year. This is going to be 810,000 euro. Like, that's a bit of a blow. I'm not saying in budgets they'll have planned necessarily for another 3.5 million, but it's certainly it will have financial implications for the club, you'd imagine. Well,
yeah, I don't know it's so much the implications, like, as in, you know, it's really worrying. It's just more the case of stressing they can't afford too many years like this one, I would think. I mean, like, the accounts will show, like, they're not a club that's been, say, turning profits in recent years, but they've had certain things that have happened, like the qualification, like Gavin Bazunu, that have given them, like, injections, and, you know, they won't have budgeted, I don't believe, for more than that. But at the same time, there would have been a realistic expectation that with that Champions route that they go into, it's not anticipated that you lose your first game, you lose your second game, and you're out. Generally, there's quite a soft landing when you lose your first Champions League game and you play a team you should beat. Now, they ended up playing Ferencváros, which is unlucky. I mean, I should mention, like, Ferencváros lost to the team from the Faroe Islands, Klaksvik. When you were in your 3.5 hour sort of dark place last night, I was in my own place following, like, you know, the scores around Europe. So Klaksvik, the champions of the Faroe Islands, they've dumped out Hungary's champions, Ferencváros, and they beat the Swedish champions on penalties last night. So now they're now guaranteed group stage football.
Right.
Like, there's a broader debate about, like, European results now, and it's mad how people will just look at the country name and brackets after a team and, like, draw assumptions. And you now have a situation where people would say, Rovers, where our clubs are miles off, but actually a club from the Faroes have now won 2 Champions League ties and are guaranteed at least Conference League groups. Now, maybe that embarrasses you in some ways, because it says, well, hang on, if they can do it, why can't we? Or it just reflects that it's cup football, it's knockout football, and crazy things can happen, and not every year should be the subject for a massive massive state of the nation debate about where things are. But Rovers have been very disappointing, and their team is old, and they're missing their most important players at the worst time, like Jack Byrne, Neil Ferrugia, all the pace of the team, the main creative players of the team. But they have been poor, and while they can sort of cope, I think, with 1 year like this, their whole plan is about getting into Europe every year and then getting through a couple of rounds. And it's not always going to be that 3 million, but it definitely will be hoping to make way more than 800 grand. And that's why there will be people nervous behind the scenes, no doubt. Yeah.
Jack Byrne going to stay by the sound of it? Well, certainly there'll be no, as Stephen Bradley said, no quick fire exit anyway because of the European exit. But
not sure when he's going to be back. That's the problem.
He's seen a knee specialist at the minute.
So Shamrock Rovers were playing Derry in the second game after the break, and it was a big night for him. Looked like that's a big step towards regaining the league. And with 10 minutes to go, in the last 10 minutes, Jack Byrne got a knee injury and Neil Ferrugia got a hamstring injury, and it may well be that 10 minutes has sort of derailed their season. It's a bit of concern.
Derry City can do it.
Derry and the Dock are still alive. Derry are 2-1 up going to Finland against the Finnish league leaders. I watched that game last week. They were decent, Derry. They've got a lot of their better players back. They've got a sort of a core of players there who would have been at Dundalk in their a strong sort of European campaigns, and they're talented footballers who can keep the ball. They've got actually a good balance for Europe, maybe even a better balance than Rovers in some ways, that they have they play with wingers. And I think if you're going away from home, they can absorb some pressure, but they can break quickly. So I'd give them a chance. Then Dundalk are chasing 2-goal deficit against a team from Iceland. They should not have lost that game by 2 goals last week. They conceded all 3 shots on target, and they had 65% possession. But I just fear that they've left themselves with a little bit too big of a mountain to climb. I think if they were 3-2 down, I'd be pretty confident they go through tonight. I think 3-1. I'm not sure if they're good enough defensively to get it done, but I'm heading to that game and I certainly expect something to happen. I don't expect it to be routine. But maybe. And look, there you go. If 2 teams lose to Icelandic teams in 1 year, you definitely are entitled to look at well, hang on, what are they doing? Like that Faroese team are part-time. Like they are going to, what they're doing is absolutely off the charts. So it's one of these things that people are going to pick up on, I think, around the world. The story of Klaksvik, because the Dog played them to get into the group stages in 2020 during COVID, and people said, the Dog so lucky to end up playing this team from the Faroes. But they've come back and they've they're doing extraordinary things, and that should probably inspire people and think, well, hang on, if these things can be done,
especially with part-time players. If they're doing that with those resources, anything can be done. Cian Rose says Pedro will be a serious threat to Evans' spot. Very good player. Can see Ferguson going to Spurs if Kane leaves.
Don't say that.
Don't let that happen. Tommy says if Roy Keane was giving the same answers as Vera, we would all think it's hilarious and be loving every minute of it. Again, Roy Keane's a pundit, not the manager. It's true, yeah. Yeah, it's fair. Kevin Power, lads, as someone whose family comes from 1 kilometre from the Cork-Kerry border on the Cork side, brackets, thank God, if you were caught wearing Kerry jersey, you'd be finished. No excuses for those Meath lads. I think that's the point. They're maybe not Meath lads. They're probably Dubs in Meath. They don't identify as it's the kids I'm concerned about. Do you know, there's kids there with Dublin jerseys on. Someone please think of the children who I'm making assumptions here, potentially play football for Ashburn and their parents are Dubs, or one parent is a Dub, and maybe that allows them to support Dublin on that day. But if you're a little kid and you're growing up in Ashburn, I want you to hate Dublin. I'm not calling for Dublin hate here, but I mean, it's nice to have a little bit of county rivalry. Do you know, we have it with Tyrone. John Egan was wearing a Kerry jersey the other day. Yes, his father, a Kerry legend. Yes, yeah. But he grew up in Cork. Where was the disdain for John Egan? There's an asterisk over that. If your father was a legend of that. I see. Well, how do you? Maybe some of these Ashburn parents have been great members of the Dublin community, just in a different sphere. Yes. So if it's true sport, you're entitled to in sport, it's fine, but if just in life, I'm not going to lie, I don't care that much. Yeah. You've just given a take, Shane, and now you're just like, I've made a mistake here. You've got me there. Yeah. So not invested, actually. Yeah. As it turns out. Celtic says half of Ashburn comes from Finglas, though. I'm not calling for Dublin hate, but ... Yeah, I know. I'm not calling for Dublin hate. I just think a little bit of county rivalry wouldn't go amiss. Can we write a colloquial rule as to how far you can be out of Dublin and still be a Dublin supporter? Like, if maybe Ashburn is at the end of a Dublin bus line, are they technically okay? If Dublin bus goes there, it could be one way of looking at it. I think it does go there, doesn't it? It does go to Ashburn. couple of transfers, Connolly and Horgan in the championship.
Yeah, well, Darrell Horgan's come back to Dundalk, having been at Wickham and others, and like that is a great signing for them. Like he's only 17 caps for Ireland. Like he's last played 2 years ago, so he's not 35. Like he's 30, Darrell Horgan. So I just think I think probably just to have a player of that quality at a team that's not necessarily like maybe a title challenge and one at the moment. I think that's just good, just to spread the talent around a bit. So that's great. Like, there's a real buzz around Dundalk, even though he's not eligible for the European game tonight. They'd be playing Club Bruges if they were to get through, and I think he'd be involved. And it's great to see him. Aaron Connolly, another Galwegian. I'm not sure about Aaron Connolly. When you think about Aaron Connolly being the sort of the 2 goals against Spurs, Brighton's sort of next Irish superstar, and the fact that him leaving the club on a permanent basis is something that's a bit of a footnote. Like, you know, it's not like a back page story. It's not sort of something that people are actively like really discussing. Like it's a point of interest. But you look at it another way, it's like, well, that's Aaron Connolly leaving a Premier League club. Will he get back there? Will Aaron Connolly play in the Premier League again? Yeah, it's a debate point. He hasn't played in Ireland for over a year. So I don't know. Like, I mean, the reports when he went to Hull at the start of earlier this year, where that even in training wise and stuff, he was applying himself quite well, and that's good, because there have been concerns about maybe just his application, and then he got injured. So it's up to him. He'll respond from this, and the shape of his career in the next 5 years will be dictated by what happens. In fact, the shape of the rest of his career will be dictated by this season with Hull. Yeah,
100%. We'll have loads more between now and 10 o'clock as well. Craig Ray standing by to talk South African rugby. They'll be in our group in the World Cup, of course. Sarah Donovan to preview the Camogie final this weekend, 8:25 a.m. That's Cork versus Waterford this weekend. So we'll get the Cork side of things, the non-biased side of things from Sarah, to be fair, as per usual. Sports news around 8:45 with John, who's back in studio, and also in studio 8:55 special treat. Conor McManus will join myself and Dan in here, and then at 9:30 we'll play you the World Cup show. Before we get to the rugby, lads, I guess a little talking point of the rugby. And Cameron, you may or may not have strong feelings on this. Jersey numbers or names on the back of rugby jerseys. Yeah, it's not a done thing at the moment.
No, so this is off the back of the Irish rugby team announcing that they will have the names on the back of their jerseys for these warm-up games. It remains to be seen whether they'll be on the back of the jerseys for the World Cup.
Do most teams do it for the World Cup?
No, this is a very new thing. England, Scotland, Wales, and I think Italy also do it at the moment. But at the World Cup would be a very new thing, and it's just something I cannot get behind at all. I think it's. Why? See, rugby is one of the last sports where the number is incredibly significant in terms of the symbolism of the players. So, when you get a number 10 jersey for Ireland, let's say Jack Crowley gets the Italy jersey, the big jersey for Italy this weekend. You're handing it down from the likes of Johnny Sexton, Ronan O'Gara, Ollie Campbell, all those stars. That 10 has significance, whereas if it has a name above it, I think it just devalues it slightly. And look, my brother was making the point that they have their names on the jerseys anyway because they're sewn in just at the hip there. Like every jersey is new for every game, but I just think the idea behind it is it just waters it down ever so slightly. Rugby, and look, I'm one of those, I'm not someone who's stuck in their old ways, but I think it's a case of reject modernity, embrace tradition. I like the symbolism around when someone takes the 13 jersey, you're like, that's Brian O'Driscoll's number, that was a jersey he imbued a lot of great moments with, or imbued with a lot of great moments. And I'm not a fan of that. I really don't like it. I think it's strange. I think it'll also kill off the novelty jersey market, which is terrible. But yeah, I'm not a fan of it at all.
I'm all for it.
Is the squad numbers for a tournament then? Are you saying it's going to be like for the?
I presume they'll get it's in the World Cup. They'll get game by game squad numbers.
Game by game squad numbers. So your 15's your fullback. That's just
but so they're not going to have different numbers during the tournament.
No.
Game by game.
Whereas in football you do that for the World
Cup. If you're doing that, go whole hog and just have 26 Crowley for the entire tournament.
That would make more sense. Right?
Way more sense.
Yeah, I guess.
Seems inefficient to be just putting names on, changing it for every game.
Yeah,
it's just reckless spending.
It is.
Exactly.
And it's not like these are unrecognisable players for commentators, you know, it's not that sort of thing.
And players change from game to game. Like Henshaw could play 12 one week and 13 the next. It's not like, 12's his number now.
Yeah,
so fair. I can't get behind this, but, you know, I am looking forward to this is the hill I'm going to die on.
Does it make it angrier than Ashburn people? Like, I mean, is this...
yeah.
On the scale of outrage, where do we put names on rugby shirts versus dubs in Meath?
Yeah, possibly above.
Although Fergus Keogh's gotten in touch saying he's from North East Paris and still a Dublin supporter. Is that okay? And it's not okay. You should be Paris Gales and France GAA.
Fair enough. Niall says no names on rugby jerseys. No, not even practically. Crowley would have had to start in 22 jersey versus Australia last year. When Sexton injury, I don't know. It's and then Flying Hellfish says they get new jerseys for every game, lads.
That's
anyway.
Yeah.
Well, look,
I've addressed that point.
Everyone like it, but Cameron, I appreciate your views and thoughts. Thanks for coming in. The Cameron Hill to die on this morning.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. 8:05 AM on this Thursday morning's OTB AM with myself and Dan with you right through until 10 o'clock. We're sticking with rugby now. Delighted to welcome to the show this morning Craig Ray, the South African rugby writer. Craig, how are things?
Morning, guys. Nice to see you, Shane.
Thanks for hopping on. What's your take on names on rugby jerseys?
I'm with Cameron on this one. I don't like it. The Springboks, the Bulls have done it in the past in Super Rugby, but they even went further. They didn't put surnames. They put the first name. So it was just like Johan, Bakkies, Victor. I don't like it. I mean, rugby, the numbers are very position specific. And so even in the team, like the Springboks have changed 13 players between last week and this. But you know that your outside centre is 13 and your open side flank in South Africa is going to be number 6. And that's just how it is. So whoever wears that jersey, it's very clear what his position and his role is.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'm coming around to the idea, Craig. But I guess we wanted to get you on to talk about the South African angle of things. Of course, we'll be in the same pool in the World Cup. 23rd of September is a date we're all looking forward to. A little bit of trepidation, I guess. It's the same on both sides. But from a Springbok point of view, so you've got the match against Argentina this weekend, the first of 3 Rugby World Cup warm-up games for the Springboks. Jacques Nienaber, of course, will announce his final 33-man squad for the World Cup next Tuesday, August 8th, before these games against Wales and New Zealand. What's the level of confidence like in South Africa at the moment, Craig?
I think it took a bit of a dent last week, actually. Well, the last 2 matches, because they opened the Rugby Championship with a 43-12 win over Australia, which could have been 60 if they were a little bit more clinical. Australia were very poor that day. The Springboks did play well. And there was a real buzz about the Springboks and a lot of confidence. And then they had split the squad. They had sent about 13 players on to New Zealand because of the short turnaround between matches to prepare for the New Zealand test. And within 20 minutes of that game, reality set in. The All Blacks played brilliantly, and the Springboks were on the back foot. I think 17-0 down in 20 minutes, and it was a slog from there. But I suppose when you take the emotion out of that, if you look at sort of minute 30 to 70 of that game, the Springboks actually won all the small battles and looked quite good. So there was a lot to take out of it when you remove the result. And then last week's game against Argentina was a very funny one. I think the big incident at the beginning of the game where scrum half Grant Williams was knocked out, and that just sort of seemed to, I don't know, just sucked all sort of momentum from the game. It had only just started, and there was a 7-8 minute delay while they dealt with the injury, and I don't think the Springboks ever really just got into the game. And to be fair, Argentina were very good as well. So they got away with the win. But it's certainly shown that the Springboks are going to have to be a little bit more consistent. I think that's been the big takeaway. They've been very inconsistent in these first 3 games. They've been great in patches and really poor in other patches.
That incident that you mentioned, Craig, so as you say, Grant Williams knocked out cold. The Argentinian fullback Juan Cruz Maia, blocking down his kick just 10 seconds into the match, collides with Williams's head. He's forced off with concussion. This is an Irish referee as well, Andrew Brace, in this match decided it was a rugby incident. Maia wasn't sanctioned at the time, but then cited after the match. There's been a lot of question marks over this incident and whether or not the officials got it right on the pitch. What's your take on it?
Yeah, I wrote a whole column on it. It's very difficult because Brace, in the framework he was working in, the first question is, is there contact to the head? And that's quite obvious. There was contact to the head. Then the second question is, was it foul play? And he decided it wasn't. And the minute he decides that, the next step of the equation is play on. So if the referee decided on the field it's not foul play, then play on. He then had another look at it after the whistle blew to stop play because Williams needed attention. And he came to the same conclusion. He said the player could do nothing about it. He was committed. He was in the air. Now, my initial thought was I was with the referee on this. I thought, well, you're asking players to attempt charge downs. You're asking players to commit. He came through. He jumped to try and charge down a kick and collided with Williams, which seemed unfortunate. But watching it again, he turns in the air. He takes off from about 5 meters before, ahead of Williams. You've got to say there's an element of recklessness about it. And for the referee to quickly make that decision that it was just a rugby incident was perhaps where they might have taken a little bit more time to look at it a bit more closely. But then, another but. But then we've had this with fans before. I sometimes feel that referees and TMOs can convince themselves there's a sniper on the grassy knoll by looking at things over and over and over again in super slow motion. I think it was foul play in the sense that it was clumsy and reckless, and perhaps it deserved a yellow card at the end of it. But I understand why Andrew Brace did what he did within the framework of the game. He decided it wasn't foul play, and the next part of that equation is then we play on. It's highly controversial. I think they've got to simplify this whole thing for referees. I think if they're going to be serious about head injuries, the starting point has got to be if there's contact to the head, it's foul play, whether it was intentional or not. I think that's got to be the starting point from here on in, because now you're asking the referee to interpret foul play as well. And was it foul play? Did the guy? If you hit him in the head, it's foul play, and then we can decide about mitigating circumstances. Is it a yellow card? Is it a red card? Is it just a penalty? So I think we've got to start with foul play for head contact, whether it's intentional or unintentional, and that might simplify the matter.
Yeah, I think people say these things shouldn't be a grey area, but the reality is that sometimes they are grey areas. These decisions, they're tough to come to, so you can understand both sides of the argument in some ways. One man named in the Springbok team starting lineup for this game on Saturday, Craig, is Jean Klein, a man who we know very well over these parts of the Munster second row, of course. His second appearance he's going to make in Buenos Aires. So he only made his South African debut, of course, last month at that 43-12 win over Australia that you mentioned, having previously played 5 times for Ireland, part of the World Cup squad 4 years ago. Is he in with a real chance of being involved for South Africa, or is he more of a squad player? What's the feeling on Jean Klein down there?
Look, he played very well. His debut, he put in a very good shift. It was quite an eye-catching performance, I thought. I think he's got a big opportunity tomorrow. If he has a big game on Saturday, rather, or early hours of Sunday morning our time, he's certainly going to make a case for himself. I think it's Marvin Orie and he are slightly different. They're partnering tomorrow. But the Springboks probably could do with another number 4 lock in the Ebenetsbeth mold in the squad, and Klein fits the bill. So I think another big performance, and he'll certainly be in consideration. But he is a late comer to the squad. The Springboks have pretty much used 43 players this year so far. They've had 43 players in the squad, and he hasn't been part of the squads for previous years. It's pretty much the same group they've taken through 2 or 3 years. So it would be a little surprise if he does make the final cut, but from a performance level, there's no reason why he shouldn't.
Craig, I'm just wondering about this book, the Rassie Erasmus Stories of Life in Rugby, which is going to be, it's coming out 10 days before the tournament starts. It does appear that some little sort of tidbits are coming out of it already, which seem to be sort of quite revealing in some ways. The previous resignation threat in 2021. I'm sort of just curious generally, what's the response been to the timing of this release, and do people feel in any way this could be possibly unsettling, or is it just sort of typical of the character and people are sort of shrugging it off?
Yeah, look, I haven't really dipped into the book much. I got a copy yesterday, so I've just had a brief glimpse at some of the things. There hasn't been too much talk about it, Dan, to be quite honest. It's been it's mostly been about the Springboks and their performance. The book has certainly not seen too much written about it, or there were some extracts, as you point out there, about almost resigning. But I think you mentioned that as well in the documentary that came out in South Africa about a year ago, Rassie Erasmus story, and that was mentioned in that documentary. So what I've seen is not much, and maybe it's because I'm closer to the game. It doesn't feel like there's a lot new, what I've heard. The timing is curious. I always think that you should publish a book after the World Cup campaign rather than before. And certainly just from a purely sales point of view, if you can get it out in time for Christmas, if you win the World Cup, it's, you're going to make great sales. And if you don't win the World Cup, people want to know why you messed up. So I think the timing is a bit odd to release a book in August. Either you go for Christmas or some sort of holiday season or Easter or something. It does seem a bit odd that it's come out at this point, but the publishers might need to answer that question.
I suppose get the juicy stories out in advance of the World Cup, sell some books, and then possibly do the updated version after the World Cup, regardless of result maybe. What's the feeling, Craig, around Ireland in South Africa? Like at the moment, of course, coming off the back of the Grand Slam, there are high enough hopes in Ireland, you'd imagine, albeit there is the impending doom that is the Rugby World Cup quarter-final that has been for us the stumbling block in recent tournaments. But how do South Africans feel about that Irish team at the moment?
Oh, look, I mean, Ireland, we know that beat South Africa last year in Dublin. I mean, there's no one in South Africa is under any illusions how good Ireland are. And I think from a Springbok point of view, though, we all, me included initially, September the 23, circle that day. That's the big game in the group. But as we saw in 2019, the Springboks lost to the All Blacks and still cruised through the group. The Springboks have said it. They're not too worried about the Ireland game just yet. Their only focus is Scotland on September the 10th, and that makes sense because that's the other real banana peel game in the group. If they beat Scotland, then the Irish game almost doesn't matter because you're likely to advance whether you win or lose that game anyway. And then it's just your quarterfinal opponent. So the Springboks are really focused on the Scotland game, and rightly so, because you can't afford to slip up against Scotland because then the Ireland game becomes a knockout match. And Ireland similarly in the same boat. I mean, they only play the Scotland after they play the Springboks, so they've got to somehow get through their first two games. And the Springbok game, and if they lose to the Springbok, suddenly the Scotland game becomes a knockout match for Ireland, possibly. I mean, Tonga could be a dangerous floater in that group. So while the Ireland game is great in terms of matching two of the world's best teams currently, the world champions against the world number one side, and there's a lot to like about that matchup, I think the reality is Scotland are the real team in the group that could spoil the party for one of the two big teams.
Yeah, I think that's fair. There have been a couple of big decisions for Neil Arbor and Rassie Erasmus to make over the last number of weeks. Not least the captaincy, which I know is a big deal in any country, but not least in South Africa. So the hooker Bongi Mbonambi has been named as captain. Is this a surprise? Of course, Sia Kolisi and Andre Pollard currently sidelined, and Dwayne Vermeulen in South Africa. So this captaincy, I guess, was a bit of a deal. Kanyo Am, I suppose, was the other name on the short list.
Yeah, I was a little surprised he got it over Lucanio Am, because out of that group that went, they were probably the two obvious candidates for the job. Bongi Mbonambi is part of the leadership group and has been for the last 4 years. They have these little internal leadership groups, and he's one of the key leaders in the group. And when they're on the field, they play different roles. The captain will obviously do what the captain does, but within that, Mbonambi is usually what they like to term good cop. So he will speak to the referee about the picture the Springboks are presenting at scrum time, for instance. That's Mbonambi's role, even when he's not captain. So he has that kind of communication with the referee. So it's just a step up from that, that he's going to take on the role. And look, he's a fierce competitor. He's a guy who sort of plays with his heart in his sleeve, and he leads by example. So he fits the bill quite well as a leader that the other men would want to follow. And I think it's quite a nice recognition for a guy who's played more than 60 tests as well, and has been, as I said, in this leadership role to get some sort of formal recognition for it as well.
Duane Vermeulen is the other name I mentioned, and it's kind of similar lines to Johnny Sexton. He had his final home game, Vermeulen, for South Africa recently, that test at Ellis Park against Argentina, his final match on South African soil. I know Schalk-Burger has been out this week paying tribute to him. I'm sure it's an emotional one. The talk in South Africa, certainly that I'm reading, is that he's expected to go into coaching. Craig, is that the path I guess we're expecting to see him take?
Yeah, I would imagine that would be the way he goes. Dwayne's quite a student of the game. He really likes the technical and tactical side of the game as well. So yeah, I can't see that he wouldn't go into that role. But I think he wants to play a little bit more rugby. At the start of the international season, his place in the World Cup squad, I don't think was guaranteed. Jasper Wiese had clearly become the first choice number 8, and it just depends how they look at the makeup of the loose forward group. But it appears now, after 2 very strong test matches, he's back in the mix, and I think he will go to the World Cup, and that will be his swan song. But I think he might still play some provincial rugby next year. But I think as far as test rugby goes, the World Cup will be it. And then he's already does handle a lot of sessions at provincial level, defensive work and line-out sessions. He sort of does a lot of that work anyway. So I think it'll just be a natural extension for him.
Yeah, it's a big name to hang up the boots, and it's certainly, you mentioned leadership earlier. Like he adds a lot more than just the playing level as well, and that's probably why we're going to miss Johnny Sexton in some regards in this country, is that when there's a gap from the dressing room, and maybe there's not, maybe he joins the Springboks coaching setup. I know he's been rumoured to maybe join one of the other provincial teams over there as well, but I guess that gap, that vacuum in the dressing room is the important thing when someone like this leaves.
Yeah, I think, as you all know, you can't buy experience. You can't just produce it. It has to be gathered and gained over years and decades even. So Sexton, Vermeulen, Pollard, you take these guys out of a dressing room, it does leave a void, and you just can't fill it. It just has to be an organic thing. It will be filled in time as more players develop those experience. But it's a big blow, and I guess what you're trying to do is make sure there's a lot of other experienced players in the dressing room. So when one of the big names drops out and goes off, there's quite a lot of people to take up the flack, as it were.
I'm not asking you to do the scouting for us, Craig, but if you were setting up to play this South African team and you were trying to pinpoint a weakness or two, where at the moment would you say those are?
I think it's 2 areas, and the All Blacks exposed it. South Africa, weirdly, their kicking game has gone to pieces in recent weeks. They then, I remember, you guys will know, a few years ago, everyone was criticising the Springboks for the box kick and the kick chase, but they were very good at it. But they seem to be highly inaccurate at the moment. When they are kicking, the kicks are too deep. They're not putting enough pressure with the kick chase. So that aspect of the game has fallen off. But I think the real weakness is the All Blacks showed it on defence under the high ball. The Springboks have been very shaky. The All Blacks kicking game was superb in Auckland a few weeks ago, and almost every kick they put up was contestable, and they won a lot of them. The All Blacks, they regained possession. So the Springboks are a bit shaky there. And then the defence out wide, it's not that Colby or Mapimpi or Orense can't tackle. It's the Springbok defensive system of pushing in from the outside in is highly effective when they all are connected and they're doing it with pace. But sometimes if the attacking side is brave enough, they can beat the rush on the outside. And Springboks have been exposed wide a few times, which means the scramble defence has to get across. Australia scored like that in the test in Pretoria. So those are probably 2 aspects. The defence, it's largely down to defence, and it's their wide defence and their defence under the high ball.
Craig, I'm going to throw you a bit of a tangent here, because I see you were tweeting about the South African women and their exploits in the World Cup. I'm sort of more of a football person myself. I'm actually just curious how that's been received, because it seems like a great sporting story from afar, but I don't know how that's sort of gone down in South Africa. Or is there much hype and buzz around that?
Yeah, look, I think women's football, I don't know what the situation is in Ireland, but it's gaining traction, but slowly. It's way behind men's football, unfortunately. But Banyana, the women's team they won the Women's African Cup last year. which was a first, and that really put them on the map, and that received a lot of airtime, a lot of support, and then making the World Cup this year, and of course yesterday's result, the country went mad. It was great to see that South Africa was really getting behind the women, and it's more so because the South African Football Association is a fairly poorly run organisation, and there was a big pay dispute before the women's team left for the World Cup. FIFA, of course, guaranteed all players in the group phase, I think $30,000 each, which will be paid directly to the players. South Africa's women's footballers, who are largely amateur or semi-professional, there's a couple of professionals in the side, wanted more from SAFA, the South African Football Association, and SAFA just refused or said they couldn't afford to pay them properly. And that led to a strike. They boycotted playing a warm-up game against Botswana, and eventually Patrice Motsepe, one of the richest men in Africa, he stepped in through his foundation to find the extra funding for the women's team, to guarantee bonuses and so on. And just as well he did, because by making the knockout stages now, there will be extra pay. So I see on social media today, SAFA are taking a pounding from people, saying, well, you guys should stump up the money and pay these players what they're worth. And let's be honest, they've gone further in a World Cup than the men's side ever did. They qualified for a World Cup, which the men's side has not done since 2002. I think it was 2010 we qualified as hosts. So the women's side is really performing well above what it should be performing at, and that's testament to their own skill and the coaching and their own commitment.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to follow that journey. First time, as you say, into the knockout stages. It's the Netherlands, so nice handy fixture for South Africa up next this Sunday in Sydney. We'll keep an eye on their story. Definitely one of the fairy tale stories of this Women's World Cup. Craig, thanks a million for hopping on this morning. Great stuff.
Nice to see you, Shane. Nice to see you there.
Brilliant stuff as always. There, Craig Ray, the South African rugby writer and of course football writer as well, in fairness.
Well, the Banyana.
Because I was watching, I made the silly mistake yesterday evening or afternoon. I was in the office and it was 2-2, and Phil Egan was watching it in the office yesterday afternoon, and I had to go out and grab a coffee, and didn't I leave at 2-2 with maybe 88 minutes in the clock. So
bad timing. Great celebrations, like one for the montage, and like you had Jamaica and Brazil yesterday too. There's been like some proper upsets, but I'm sort of curious to that, because I was in South Africa for 2010 for the World Cup, the men's World Cup, and like there was actually sort of great emotion behind their journey there, but it ended very quickly. And I see there's some suggestion they might try and bid for a Women's World Cup, so it'd be interesting to see how this would pan out for them. But I think the women's game probably needs that. I think previously and I've seen Nigeria do quite well, but previously I think in the latter stages it's been quite dominated by some of the more traditional forces, and it seems like this tournament is breaking the mold for that a little bit.
As long as we never hear the vuvuzelas ever again.
Oh no, I won't have a bad word said against.
Oh, you're a fan?
Yeah, definitely. They're terrible on TV,
but
they are part of the culture.
The stadium environment as well.
They are part of the stadium. It's like, let's bring the tournament to a country and just tell them to not behave as they normally would at a sports match. Let's have the homogenization of everything. This doesn't suit me in my world, but we brought it to Africa, so it's
better than a Mexican wave, I suppose.
Yeah, you can't be just bringing the dubs to Mead. You can't just get get involved with the local. Why don't you just go there? You bring the World Cup there. You should do what the local people there do at football matches.
Yeah. Well,
you need to be consistent with your
maybe that's it. That's why the dubs that move to Meath should wear Meath jerseys.
Oh yeah, that's actually true. Sorry, you're opposite. That's the opposite point. You're correct. Yeah,
we'll get there eventually on that argument. People are ripping me apart in the comments, but sure, that's part and parcel of it. 8:28 a.m. on this Thursday morning's OTB AM. I should mention Braeburn Coffee is the official coffee partner of OTB. Braeburn Coffee is coming to an Apple Green near you. New Braeburn locations are popping up every month, so visit applegreenstores.com/Braeburn to find your nearest Braeburn Coffee experience. After this short break, Sarah Donovan previewing the Camogie final.
OTB AM. Off the Ball Daily.
A home for your favourite podcasts from Off the Ball. The performance rankings, a slight tangent, the crappy quiz, and you had to be there.
Go on, make up our Boston's our quizmaster. You know what I mean? And I had heard about it. I had heard about it prior to that, and me being the super Bows man I am, I brought Bows jerseys with me and gave it to him.
Subscribe to the Off the Ball Daily podcast feed right now.
OTB AM.
The Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball.
Yeah, it's approaching 8:30 on Thursday mornings, OTB AM, with myself and Dan with you through till 10 o'clock this morning. Time to turn our attention to the Camogie final this weekend. Upcoming Cork versus Waterford. Sarah O'Donovan, good morning.
Good morning, lads. How's it going?
Keeping well. We were chatting, as you know, to Chloe Murray yesterday, and she made the point that the entire country, bar one county, is supporting Waterford this weekend. How does that feel to know that everyone is against you?
It's probably true. This is the David versus Goliath story. This is the Meath of the ladies football world opportunity for Waterford. If they were to do this, that would be the scenario. This would be coming up from Division 1B, having never, I suppose, really challenged any of the teams. No team has challenged Cork, Kilkenny or Galway since 2012. Dublin tried it in 2017, failed to make the final. Tipperary failed to make the final, and Waterford come out of nowhere, parachuted into the final on Sunday, and I think they have a chance.
They absolutely did come out of nowhere, didn't they? Like, I don't think there was any pundits giving them a chance at the start of the season, but the way in which they play is exciting as well. They go for goals. Cork tend to concede goals, so that sets it up a little bit nicely, I guess.
Yeah, I've been following the team since probably 2020. So I was in the management crowd with Dublin when we relegated them from the league in 2020, and really, really concerned at the time. I was saying to you last week, Shane, that Waterford would disappear. They've had, I think, 3 different managers in the last 5 years. So that's another narrative that's kind of hard to fathom. Dan Shanahan was in there in 2020. Derek Lyons, Callum Lyons' dad, was in there for the last number of years, done amazing work. And now this year, a new manager again in Sean Power. So, you know, they've had so many setbacks, and they've had so much, I suppose, inconsistency in terms of their setups, their resources. The group themselves, though, has stayed together. And as you mentioned, ridiculous goals from the likes of Niamh Rockett, Beth Carton, class players in the likes of Brianna O'Regan, Lorraine Bray. It's just such a solid, cohesive group. And I think that's why they're in the All-Ireland final on Sunday.
When we chat about this Waterford team, we inevitably start talking about Beth Carton quite a bit, but I think there's good reason for that. I mean, she is brilliant, Sarah, and that's one large enough headache for Cork this weekend.
It is, I suppose, from Cork's point of view, they've had large headaches all season.
Yeah.
So in Galway, they've had some, incredibly good players to be especially the likes of Siobhan McGrath, Aoife Donoghue in midfield for Galway, but they managed her. In terms of Kilkenny and what they did against Kilkenny in Croke Park just a short number of weeks ago. Again, Cork have had to manage big players and have done so all season. So I don't think Cork will be as concerned about one player as maybe the rest of the country will.
Cork, one thing mentioned by Chloe Murray and even yourself after the semi-final, I think it was as well, Sarah, was the Cork impact from the bench, the strength and depth. Like when you have people like Aisling Thompson coming off the bench sometimes, and Hayes as well is another. That's something that I guess Cork can turn to, because when you get to that 45-50 minute mark, that's what you need. You need that extra little burst.
Yeah, but I was reading Cathal O'Neill calling his the subs for Limerick hurlers the bomb squad. Mm-hmm. Do Cork start the bomb squad or hold the bomb squad? Because you've got 3 all-stars on the bench there: Aisling Thompson, Orla Cronin, Laura Hayes, who didn't start the semi-final. Matthew Toomey has a big question on his hands, because do you go with your strongest 15 or do you start the consistent 15 that have got you to this point? I wouldn't like to be in his shoes this week trying to figure out his best 15.
Which would you do, Sarah?
Go for broke. I'd have every player, if they're fit enough, they're good enough, they're on the starting 15. Yeah, I'd have Aisling in. The only thing about Aisling, I suppose, compared to Laura Hayes, is Aisling's just back from an ACL. She did it, I think, September, October of last year. So to even get back in the time frame that she has is pretty ridiculous. Laura Hayes had a foot injury in the start of the year. I don't know how impacted she is. Maybe they are on borrowed time. Maybe they are only able to pay for 20-25 minutes, I suppose, which is great for the girls who are starting, because it gives them an opportunity to get in. But I just don't know how fit the girls are and whether they have 60 minutes in them. So maybe the question has answered itself.
There are some big selection headaches for Cork, and it's not just those decisions to kind of start the bomb squad or not. But I guess in a final, in some ways people would argue you stick with what's gotten you here. So I guess the semi-final team is probably the favourite one.
Yeah, and look, they've been very consistent all year. I was speaking last week about the dual player issue for Cork. They've had a really kind of tough summer in that consistently week on week they've had players going to the footballers one week, staying with the Camogie the next week, the likes of Libby Coppinger, Hannah Looney, Orla Cahalan. That's another headache for Cork, both sides, for the ladies footballers as well, where you have players available but you're not sure whether they'll be playing camogie or football in any week, and then they're training with the footballers one night, they're training with the camogie the other night. If you look at the other teams involved in the championship, Galway didn't have that headache. They don't have dual players. Kilkenny don't have dual players. So this is another kind of, I suppose, positive for Cork in that they've come through the dual player issue and beaten Kilkenny and Galway, who didn't have the same issue.
The other thing about this final, Sarah, is that it's a novel fixture. I mean, was someone saying the first time since 2012 that we haven't had, the Cork, Galway, Kilkenny, I guess trifecta, two of them in it. So from that perspective, it's a good thing for Camogie, you'd imagine. Stretches the horizons a little bit.
It does, and Antrim played in the quarterfinal against Tip, which was another novel pairing. I suppose it's just from the point of view of the teams outside of the top six, the resources that you need to be able to get into the top six and the money that you need to spend. County boards would find it very difficult to consistently, I suppose, deliver those resources for those players. So to keep Waterford's, Antrims, the Tipperaries in around the top six and keep the competition competitive, you have to spend money.
Sarah, I was just reading the attendance on Sunday. I think the anticipation is sort of the 30,000 territory. And I know can sometimes be annoying around like your showpiece games that people end up sort of really analysing these things very closely and maybe not so much the match itself. But like, is that good? Is that sort of a respectable figure? Or would there be a feeling there's more potential there to develop? Or is that sort of, that's reflective of where things are?
I think 30,000 is reflective where things are. If you look at the League of Ireland, I suppose, is the kind of juxtaposition here, because that's what I'd be identifying against. And what would we get in the Aviva for an FAI Cup final in terms of the men's side? Would we look at 40,000 or 30,000?
Yeah, I think it's been 30. It's got up to upwards of 35 the last couple of years, but after a couple of years where it fell well below it, yeah.
And I suppose if we look at kind of them in comparison, if you're getting ladies finals and you're getting 30,000 there and you're getting 30,000 at the men's finals, that's where I see it. I think it's bang on right now. Dublin and Meath in the ladies football was kind of the sweet spot for the ladies football to get them over the 50k because of the proximity. But for the setup, I suppose we had 7,000 people in Nolan Park 2 weeks ago. For the Camogie semi-finals. The hurling was on the Sunday, so again that was a big showing for the Camogie side on a Saturday when you'd, I suppose, the showpiece in the hurling on the Sunday. So if you're looking at close to 50,000 people coming to the Camogie between the quarterfinals, semi-finals and finals, that's pretty good, and it should be on an upward trajectory then from there.
Yeah, and I sometimes think like the week to week is more important, or the rounds building up to it, because the final is the final. But it's actually to make it more than that one time a year, that one trip a year. And I think that to me is almost more significant than people sort of labouring on. It's easy sometimes to run free buses to a final or to do things like that, but it's actually the more consistency, to me, that's the trend that you should be watching, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and look, it's hard to find a sweet spot in terms of whether you play the games on a Saturday evening, whether you play them on a Sunday, you clash them with the hurling, you clash them with the football. They're with this microwave championship, or with the season being so short, they're running right into the men's games, and the question is, where do you take the kids? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a real hard one, but semi-final was unbelievable in terms of the atmosphere in Nolan Park, and that was driven by Waterford. Lads, they never stopped chanting from this was the 24th minute when they got the goal. They just kept going, and that was a real driver for them. So I know Chloe had said yesterday about the 16th man in Croke Park being really important, and Waterford bringing those crowds, could be big. It could be big on Sunday for Waterford if they get the crowds in.
Could have an impact for sure. The other thing from the Cork perspective, Sarah, I guess, is the pain of losing consecutive finals. That's not something you get rid of too quickly, especially when it's this current crop that have experienced it. Is that something that you can kind of utilise, or is it, I guess each year is different, but I mean it certainly has an impact that I guess that pain never leaves you.
So this group has kind of, I suppose, under-delivered since 2018, but we're not talking massive margins. We're talking by a point, losing to Kilkenny by a point, losing to Galway by a point. They've been losing games in the last minute in injury time. Really, really heartbreaking stuff. Saoirse McCarthy got player of the match in the semi-final, midfielder for Cork. This is her 6th season with Cork. Year on year, she's been coming to the ultimate minute and losing. So there's a lot of pain, I think, bottled for that group of girls. And the issue, I suppose, for them is, as Chloe mentioned yesterday, there's a big cohort of people would love to see Waterford do this. So Cork nearly have to cut out the noise, give a performance, and if they deliver a performance on Sunday with the group that they have, this game shouldn't be an issue for them.
I was listening to a conversation, I think, reading with Amy O'Connor during the week, and funny how she, in an alternate universe, could have been maybe coming home from Australia with this team from the same parish, I think, in Knocknaheeny as Denise O'Sullivan, and would have played underage, even at an international level with her. So that's an interesting strand as well. That, what a big week for her. I guess she's been watching and following the Women's World Cup closely, but will be in Croke Park on Sunday.
These would have been all her former teammates. So there was an under-17 squad there a number of years ago, which included Denise, Claire Shine, Sarah, the Mayo footballer.
Sarah Rowe was in it as well.
Sarah Rowe was in it, and Amy. Amy has pace to burn, lads. She's incredible, but we're very lucky that she went to UCC and decided to pit herself with Camogie and play Ashburn, and for her to be captain of Cork. And I suppose she's a real talent, right? And a goal scoring forward, which is crucial for Cork on Sunday. It would be huge for her to bring it back to St. Vincent's. Really, really proud club. So I suppose she just has to block out the noise as well, right? And get the job done on Sunday, because so many times in the last 6 years they've failed to get over the line.
There are these annoying people, Dan, and sometimes it happens in the office. Jenny Claffey being one of them, that's just super talented at a number of different sports. Sarah's another one as well. So Sarah, underage Irish Soccer International, as well as the Camogie. It's just like, did you walk around school with the head held high, Sarah, and the ego? Just like, does it affect your personality? Is what I'm trying to ask.
I went to an all-girls school and they thought I was a massive tomboy, so I don't think they even took any notice. I was obviously very rarely in school in 5th and 6th year because I had so much on.
You weren't Mitching, you actually had sport on, to be fair.
Up and down the train on a Friday, back to school on a Monday. Absolutely nuts stuff. Would I recommend it? I think you have to, really. It's an incredible experience to have, but I suppose for the likes of Amy and Denise, they came at such a positive time in Cork soccer that they were in a great group, and they became really successful. I'd love to be 10 years younger to be able to get a chance to play professional soccer.
There's probably there's generations there that probably missed those opportunities. I mean, that's the reality. Like it's I think in other codes, like we've generally sorted out sort of talent ID and the sort of the strongest can sort of get to the peak of their potential, but there's obviously a couple of areas where that hasn't been the case at all. I think definitely like women's football is definitely soccer like is high up that list, and there's opportunities there. I think people like Katie Taylor and people like that, like it's sort of I'm not saying she wouldn't have gone the route that she did, but clearly if there was a full-time contract somewhere at the age of 18, do you sort of think, I mean it's look, I mean the flip side of that is that a lot of the players who are going to England now say the money actually isn't that good, and I think that this is a part of it as well, that it's great to commit to your passion, but it's not something that's setting them up longer term either, and that's why you kind of have to look at the education thing here, in my opinion. So there's a lot of elements to it, and it's probably going to develop over the next period of time.
The best players, I suppose, in my group as well. Katie Taylor was in my team, but Mary Waldron, and I don't know if you saw, she's retired this week. She's been playing cricket for the last, I think, 13 years with Ireland. Mary was our captain. She was an incredible soccer player. Mary Curtin was on RT this week with doing the soccer coverage. Again, an incredible soccer player. There's so many players who, I suppose, look enviously now at the WSL going, what could have been. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I guess you just have to make those. Sorry, I call it mitching, but I'm told by producer Colm here, Cork man, of course, that it's skiving in Cork. What do you call it, Dan?
Well, I wouldn't know.
Of course.
Yeah,
I only know when other people told me. Do you know?
Yeah.
What the word was? Nerd. We can call it nerd here. I was head prefect, Colm, I'll have you know. So I'm going to tell the principal on you. But thanks for that. No, the other one I wanted to bring up, and we mentioned her name already, Sarah, was Aisling Thompson. I saw it was Amy O'Connor actually talking about Aisling Thompson during the week, and she was praising her for her injury recovery, and she kind of missed the stoppage time opportunity to level the decider last year against Kilkenny, so I'm sure she holds on to that. But is she someone that you would like to see? Well, I guess she is. She's part of that bomb squad. She starts.
If she could start, that would be amazing, but in terms of her fitness, I don't know if she has 60 minutes with the ACL. Like, I suppose you'll find, and I found myself, that you kind of get 20-30 minutes and the leg gets really tired, and then you don't have the energy to keep going. So maybe it is that this season she will be confined to that kind of second half, but she was incredible last year when she came on against Waterford in the semi-final. And they may have PTSD when they see her coming on in the final, if that's the case this time around, because she literally turned the game on its head last year. Waterford were in control, they were looking really comfortable, and this powerhouse performance from Aisling from midfield last year in Croke Park, it'll be something that they'll probably watch this year to get it out of their system before the game starts, because it's Aisling's movement and the way she can sweep up so much. I suppose the danger ball in front of Beth Carton. Yeah, Waterford have a lot of plugs to fill over the next couple of days to figure out how they're going to contain this Cork team, because we haven't even spoken about Katrina Mackey, and she was so impressive in the semi-final. Briefly,
Sarah, who's winning and by how much?
Cork by 6.
Oof, that's fair. That's head and heart, I think. That's not just heart.
That's Cork delivering a performance that they absolutely have to deliver. They owe this to themselves.
Yeah, I can't wait for that final. It's going to be a cracker. And the intermediate and junior finals, of course, on Sunday afternoon in Croke Park as well. Sarah, brilliant stuff as always. Thanks a million.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
You too. Sarah Donovan there on the line with us. Just seeing news pop through at 8:45. We're getting messages about it as well. Tom Brady has become the new co-owner of Birmingham City FC and will apparently take a major hands-on role. Championship side bought by American Tom Wagner earlier this year. Tom Wagner, if you want to pronounce it that way. He's become, Tom Brady, a minority shareholder. Multiple reports this morning of the Championship side Birmingham City will assume the role of chairman of the club's advisory board. Announced this morning, the club, having undergone a takeover by Tom Wagner, as I said earlier this summer, announced his retirement, Tom Brady, from the NFL in February after over 2 decades as a player. Just reading here, Brady has forged a close relationship with Wagner's Knighthead company in recent years. He is also part of the group's ownership of Major League Pickleball, with his lifestyle apparel clothing company, the official apparel partner of Knighthead's World Endurance Championship Racing team. That's not something I expected to be talking about.
Everyone wants a part of it. Birmingham City's history from Karen Brady to Tom Brady.
Oh, wow.
Story. There you go.
That was quick.
Yeah, no, that's where she got her breakthrough. But yeah, and it's just part of the Americanization of football in England. Like, you see the golfers are sort of dipping into Leeds. It's the whole Wrexham thing, probably.
Yeah, they all want to slice the pie.
Now. Yeah. Even though the championship is absolutely bonkers.
Yeah.
And like, everyone's losing money, but no one cares because you might get promoted.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very unstable environment. But why not?
Absolutely. John Duggan, good morning.
Shane and Dan, how we doing?
You enjoying this Americanization of world sport?
I don't mind.
I did mention earlier that JD today does have the look. He looks like an American Ryder Cup player about to play in Europe. Like, he's just got the whole look here, the hat, the hoodie, it's very much. I definitely feel like that's where you should be. You should be in Marco Simone, sort of striding onto the first fairway and saying that this guy, I'm not sure how he's going to handle Europe. You definitely have that look about you.
Any recommendations for what I could see in Dublin today?
Well, Colin Boog's out there saying you look like a 2-time Oscar winner. To me, you look like someone who's about to take a selfie with the Molly Malone statue.
Yeah, I'm going to go get a Straw House by 11 o'clock, and then
you could definitely
Carvery.
pass for it. I mean, if your accents are good, JD, you can do it.
Well,
it's a Breeders' Cup hat, though. You were telling me.
You only hear my accents when I've had a few.
You look like a man who's about to spend a lot of money at Temple Bar and Carol's. He's going to be in Carol's all day.
The staff rates like Carol's, and like there's one coming. Here he comes down the street.
Well, they're going to see you coming a mile away, John.
I bought this hat in Kentucky at the Breeders' Cup last year, and it's made in China. So there you go.
Sums up capitalism, doesn't it? America.
Yeah.
China.
Yeah.
Wow. It's the first time we've got a chance to talk to you, John.
Yeah.
Since the All Ireland on Sunday. How was your experience?
It was incredible, lads. It was. Look, I'm from Dublin. I'm born in Holles Street in the capital, and from the age of 8 to 15, I was a Dublin fanatic. And then my heart was too much broken by the defeats of the early 90s, and after the down game I just couldn't take it anymore. I think I suppressed all my feelings for the Dublin footballers who I started supporting in 1987, but to see this team engage in their last hurrah was unbelievable. And I'm a big student of the history of sport. I love the history of sport, and I love the legacy of sport and the patterns of things, and Dublin and Kerry are the Barcelona, Real Madrid, or the Manchester United and Liverpool of Gaelic football. And from a legacy point of view, it felt like a legacy game. When you think back to 1924 is when the 23 All-Ireland was played, Dublin didn't win another All-Ireland against Kerry until 1976. That's 52 years. There was like landmark moments like the 55 final, which scarred Kevin Heffernan. There was then the games they played in the 70s and 80s when Kerry generally were on top. Once again, Dublin didn't win a game against Kerry in the championship between 1977 and 2011. But in the last 12 years, they've won 5 times, they've drawn 1, they've only lost 1. And between 75 and 86, Kerry won 8 and 12. Dublin have won 9 and 13 in the last 13 seasons. So for Kerry, for Jack O'Connor, who had a 3-1 record against the Dubs before last weekend, now it's a 3-2 record and the 2 defeats in finals. And it's almost like I'm wondering to myself, in 50 years' time, it's 38-31 now. Will Dublin be the top team in terms of All Ireland's won? Because when I was growing up, I always felt that Kerry are the establishment of Gaelic football. Dublin had problems with Meath. They've been obviously put to bed now. But to beat the establishment team, which Kerry have always been. They've always been the Real Madrid of Gaelic football. It's a real legacy game and a really big important game and a justifiable game then for Cluxton, Mannion and McCaffrey to come back. Very tense match. I felt Kerry were the better team, especially in the second half. I thought Dublin had shaded the first half, and I thought Kerry were going to win this, but they just couldn't seem to keep their composure in the last 25 minutes. They only scored 2 points. When you look at the players picked in the half-forward lines, now I know Paul Mannion played inside in the first half. Dublin's starters in inverted commas in the half-forward line scored 1-5 from play. Kerry got 1 point from play through Sean O'Shea. And Kerry didn't have enough scores from the midfield defensive positions back, where you see Fenton chip in with a couple of points. Cluxton got a couple of points, and Dublin were much better on the turnovers than Galway were last year. So I never felt watching the game and the extremely tense game in those conditions that Dublin were going to win it. But David Clifford had a really off day for him of a man of his quality, and Dublin just saw it over the line. They almost willed themselves to victory, and Paul Mannion probably the difference.
We kind of were having conversations in the office during the week, John, and a bit on air yesterday morning as well, about where the 9 All-Ireland wins for Dublin since 2011, where this one ranks, and almost like a power rankings for Dublin fans as to what it means.
It's definitely in the top 2. I think 2011 will always be special because of the fact that it was 16-year famine, and it was won by the last kick of the game with Stephen Cluxton, and it was the start of everything really. And it'd be Kerry in a final. But this possibly is the sweetest win for any Dublin supporter or any Dublin fan, because once again you're beating Kerry in a legacy game, and we know this is it now for Dublin. It's like Kerry 1986. Dublin will not win the All-Ireland next year, in my opinion, because I think
Dublin will not win the All-Ireland next year. Not
at all. No, I just felt like the last ever game, and to come out on the right side of it. There's a big difference between coming out on the right side and the wrong side. I think it's going to be a long winter for Kerry, a lot of soul searching. We know they're obsessed about the game down there, but it's also once again the legacy and the history of the game. Cluxton, Fitzsimons, McCarthy, 9 All-Irelands. I think they'll all retire. I think Dean Rock, McCaffrey, Mannion, Farrell, I think they're all gone.
Jesus.
They're all finished. So how many will Dublin win in the next decade, John?
maybe one.
Do you think so?
You're being cute here,
This
John.
is absolute now. This is game playing being played.
It's
here.
not. This is it. It's all over now.
Look at the lads coming along in their mid-20s and stuff as well.
The microphone is dropped. The microphone is dropped. There's nothing else to achieve. Ever
10. Some of these lads want to get to 10.
Do you think the Dublin can only win one in the next 10?
Well, I'm just.
How much should Dublin expect to win? I mean, they've mentioned they're annexing other counties around them practically.
What, like your own county?
Yeah, they're taking them all.
When is RD over
Ashburn? They just can't.
When is RD in Dublin?
They can't obviously make their way to Kerry, right? There's obviously some places they can't breach, but genuinely, how many will they win across the next 20 years? What's the reasonable over under and what Dublin should win?
I think 20 years, maybe 4.
4
All Ireland.
16 years they won't win it.
Who's coming through from a minor under 21 level? Not that many players I think are coming through. If you take all the players I've mentioned out of the team, and they were the key players in the team last Sunday, who's been really impressed that's come through? Maybe Lee Gannon has been the most impressive player, and Pascal had a good season. Pascal's not young. If you take all those players out of a team, and they're going to go because they've achieved everything they need to achieve. I'm looking at Galway next year. I'm looking at Derry next year being pretty strong, and I just think it's cyclical.
This is absolute game playing
it's
here.
It's cyclical. I'm not game playing.
Just
as much as
one in the next 10.
It was cyclical for Kerry. Kerry have won what? They won 2 since 2009. That's 14 years, 2 and 14 years. It's not an outlandish thing to say when you think about Kerry being the aristocrats of the game.
I've really enjoyed this plucky Dublin underdog story. I have to say, it's like the Pharaohs team. It's like Claxvik. They've beaten all the rules on population, on structures, everything.
We've come full circle. Kerry fans were the cute ones, and now Dublin fans are going to, because they've won so much, turn into the cute ones. They're like, oh well, look at.
It was fun while it lasted, lads. Yeah. We've got nothing going for us here. Let's just head out to some of our wonderful plush clubs in South Dublin.
But I do think there's
massive population.
I do think there's a hunger thing. I do think there's a hunger thing, and there's a cycle in sport. And you saw it with the Kilkenny hurlers. You think, Kilkenny hurlers are never going to not win. They haven't won. It'll be 9 years next year since they won.
That's not due to a lack of hunger, though. I don't think.
No, but it's a cyclical thing. I think sport is cyclical, and you have generational players. Cluxton, McCarthy, Fenton. See, these are some of the greatest players the game has ever seen. We're talking about generational game.
How old is Fenton?
Players.
He's only 30.
30, really? Yeah.
I say only 30.
He's got a
talking about generational players here. You're never going to see the likes again, as was the case with Mikey Sheehy, Pat Spillane, Jack O'Shea, Ger Power, Ogie Moran, Paddy O'Shea in the Kerry team. You just can't keep on going like that forever. The sport is by its nature is cyclical, and that's just my kind of feeling on it. And I felt that was it for Dublin on Sunday. That's why it was so sweet.
Did they not want to go and get number 10, some of those lads?
Just laughed. Sure, 9 is the record, so why would you?
Not with the hurlers.
Honestly, this is a masterclass.
That's why he's wearing the hat, to hide the twinkle in his eye.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah,
I'm not sure about this.
What do we feel about the FAI? Because
people power, player power.
What do you feel, John?
This is player power, and people aren't really saying much in that overt way. And maybe I'm not completely right about that, but seems to be this is player power. Can you imagine Jack Charlton being told what to do in terms of picking a team? And whether it's right or wrong, I do think it's on the players now. If they want somebody else in there to be their coach for the Nations League or the Euros, that I suppose they need to step up and qualify, because it's just a very strange atmosphere around the fact that this is a World Cup. We never qualified for one before. We equipped ourselves well. We played 2 teams ranked in the top 10 in the world, and the atmosphere just seems all wrong around it, whoever's fault that may be. But I don't think anybody comes well out of this, and the whole thing should be completely about pure celebration, and I just don't feel that that's in the atmosphere at all, and I feel it's just pretty sad.
Someone in the comments suggested this morning Katie McCabe should have been hauled off by Vera Pauw at that moment.
Well, I think definitely, as I said, Vera Pauw, there's a lot of affection for her in the country, and there will be people who will sort of just look at this and go, they enjoy the idea of the coach as the authority figure, and they will warm to that. Now, and that may well be the case. I think certainly, Pauw sort of intimating, although I don't think she explicitly sort of said that McCabe wanted Sinead Farley taken off, but certainly alluded to it in such a way that it could be interpreted. That is, Pauw didn't need to do that either.
No.
And but then from listening to the people who were there, the way the attendance or the noise, like you could hear McCabe what she was saying, like from the pitch in the stadium. Like you will, like managers now will be lauded for having a leadership group of players. I can't imagine Jack Charlton necessarily had a leadership group in the way that people do now, where they have the 3 or 4 players who will like give their opinions, and they will probably be. It's a sort of a modern thing now, to be asked about our training, what's our training like, or what do you need, and that probably would have been frowned upon 20-30 years ago. So I'm not sure we should be going back to that reference point of how leadership works. I think it's a more.
Would Pep accept it?
You would think not, but then at the same time, like, would he have discussions with, like, you hear him, he respects the intelligence of certain players,
and
like
he does
Bernardo Silva,
De Bruyne,
De Bruyne. So it's the public nature of it, which always indicates a version of disrespect, right? But then, see, if the manager's doing well, that's fine. If they're doing badly, people think, what does this say about the group? And it just feels like the thing over a long period of time, maybe some frustrations have spilled over.
Insurrection in the camp. Any other bits and bobs, John, this morning flying around?
Not really. Who was your footballer of the year, Shane?
I was going to ask you. For me, it's Stephen Cluxton. I thought David Clifford. I mentioned David Clifford yesterday. He probably is the footballer of the year. Ger was saying, his performances in the final and maybe semi-final would lead you away from David Clifford possibly. But if you're going to pick from Dublin, I would pick Stephen Cluxton.
I tend to agree with you, to be honest. And it's the Joe Brawley view as well, isn't it? But the composure in those kickouts in that final was a sight to behold. I think that you probably can't underestimate, and it'll probably come out in the wash, what he brought to the group in terms of the dressing room, pushing standards, but just pushing the culture, and giving that security to Dublin that they could get over the line. Obviously scored a couple of points in the final himself. I think Mick Fitzsimons was unlucky not to win man of the match last weekend, because Mick Fitzsimons would have been thinking, and obviously relishing the task, but to go to sleep the night before the All-Ireland final knowing you're going to have to unnerve and unsettle David Clifford, for him to have an off day and do as much as he can to limit his potential for damage. I do think that was a magisterial performance for a guy who once again has been an underrated player. But I don't think, the problem is people want to fit James McCarthy into this, because James McCarthy unfortunately has never won Footballer of the Year, and he should have won it in 2017 when Dublin beat Mayo to win the
You can't
All-Ireland.
give it to him as a token though.
But you can't. You has to be on the basis of this year, and he didn't have the best of finals, whereas Cluxton this year, you can definitely say, was definitely a game changer. Even in the Monaghan game, the kickouts, and obviously you're there, Shane, when Dublin were just finding it a little bit difficult to put Monaghan to bed. You can't really argue against Stephen Cluxton, but you could definitely argue for other players to get it too.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll talk with Monaghan in just a second. We've Conor McManus standing by as well. John, thanks a million for that.
All right, Shane, Dan, good to see you.
See you, John.
Brilliant stuff. Back again this Saturday, no doubt, lads.
Saturday week. This is Dan's warm-up game.
Of course,
Saturday week.
Of course, sorry.
Once JD comes back from a couple of days in Killarney and wherever else he's going on his his
Kentucky or something. No, he's going down to Tampa Bar with that hat on. Carol's souvenir shop. Best of luck, John. Great stuff as always. 9:01 AM on this Thursday morning's OTB AM, the sports breakfast show, and off the ball. Myself and Dan with you through until 10 o'clock. During the ad break here, a clip from the latest episode of the F1 pod, where I was joined by Bernie Collins, the former head of race strategy for the Aston Martin Formula 1 team, and the 5-time Grand Prix winner John Watson, as we chatted about Oscar Piastri. You can catch the full episode now on the OTB Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcasts. The F1 pod on OTB brought to you by Chicago Town Pizza. Real takeout taste for less with Chicago Town. Conor McManus in studio after the break.
You're listening
to OTB AM.
3, 2, 1, go.
Whether you're a Drive to Survive fan or Grand Prix expert, now you can stay up to date with the world of F1. The F1 pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza, the ultimate podcast for F1 fans. The F1 pod will keep you on the edge of your seat. For the best insight and analysis, subscribe to the Off the Ball daily podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. The F1 pod on Off the Ball with Chicago Town Pizza. Formula 1? Yeah, we go to town on it.
But I don't know who you could put into the second Red Bull. I mean, I know who I would put in. And the person I would put in, and might be a bit early in his career, but I think he is potentially going to be an outstanding Grand Prix driver over many seasons. And it was the driver who finished second in the sprint race, Oscar Piastri. And I thought that was an outstanding drive from Oscar in his first season in Formula 1 on a demanding circuit. to get second place. I mean, what would Red Bull do? They could choose pretty much who they would like. On the other hand, there's a lot of established drivers who could be put in the frame, but they would look at Max and think, well, would I not be better off staying where I am in a team and being the de facto number one driver than going into Red Bull and being, in effect, the riding shotgun, or if you want to be blunt about it, cannon fodder for Max?
Yeah, Piastri could be a shout. Like his performance in that sprint race, Bernie, was just impeccable, and it was a brilliant sprint race to watch.
Yeah, I think it was, and a good call for McLaren to pit box him as the safety car was coming in as well, but drove very well, held on his pace, had a good qualifying. The qualifying previously had set him up for that position to be in the sprint race, and he just didn't put a foot wrong, really. The McLaren was obviously strong in those conditions, but all weekend through both of the qualifying sessions, he looked like he was going to have a real chance of shock and a shock result. And the only reason he didn't probably is because it ended up fully dry on soft tyres. But I think if it had been on the inter tyre, any of the qualifying finished, there was a real risk of an upset there from Piastri, which to have that pressure on him. And I'm quite excited, like John suggested, I think it's a good one, but because I'm quite excited to see what he can do, because this is going to be, we've talked about Spa, we've talked about how much it's used as a track. This will be a track that he knows inside out from his junior career. And the other tracks have probably been much more a learning curve. So by next year, when he's had a year at each of the tracks under the belt and had a learning, what can he do next year is very exciting going forward, I think, for him to see what he can bring as he gets more experience and more learning at the tracks we have, because this should be a circuit that he knows really well.
OTB AM.
The Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball.
All right, approaching 9:05 on this Thursday morning's OTB AM, the Sports Breakfast Show, and Off the Ball with myself and Dan McDonnell with you this morning. I mean, what's better than having one Monaghan person in the studio? I think it's two, Dan, wouldn't it be?
Well, that would be the quota. Possibly. Has now been exceeded.
It has been exceeded. Yeah. We're only allowed two. It can never be three, according to Ger. So, Conor McManus is in the studio. Morning, Conor. How are things?
Ian, how are you?
Keeping well. Keeping well.
Yeah, thank you.
If you had €1 for every time someone asked you if you're continuing on next year between the last couple of weeks, how much quid would you have?
I think I might start charging. All right. Yeah. Listen, it's a hot topic whenever somebody meets you. But listen, it's to be fair, people I suppose mean well. They're not overly intrusive, and they probably are all conscious of probably not asking you, but still ask you at the same time. But listen, yeah, it's people do mean well, like.
It is. Do you think people try and retire sports people too early? Like this conversation seems to come up as soon as someone hits a certain age. I don't know if it's 32 or 3 or 4, but all of a sudden then it's almost like a pressure is put on them.
Yeah, well, definitely within GAA anyway. It seems to be once you hit that 30, 31 mark at all, that conversation keeps coming up and is fairly at the end of every year. It's sort of, but I suppose when you get into the mid-30s, it's certainly something that comes up at the end of every season. But listen, I suppose if you look at last weekend, and the Dubs are a prime example of that. Mick Fitzsimons, James McCarthy, Stephen Cluxton. So I think if the body and mind is willing, there's no reason if for players to be pulling out as early.
Yeah. So you won't make it. We have a photo that I think we can put up on screen of yourself and your parents after the semi-final against Dublin, Frank and Mary there. Like, everyone was sharing that photograph. Everyone was sharing there was a photograph of you walking down the tunnel as well from behind. Like, all these emotional, and people, I guess, reading into, certainly Monaghan fans as well, reading into you walking onto the pitch afterwards and kind of taking a little moment to yourself. But I guess people are going to read too much into these little things.
Yeah, well, listen, they're just snapshots of I suppose after the game that they don't really tell the story, because there's no story to tell. I don't know myself what's happening, so people obviously can make their own assumptions and ideas. Listen, it may be the case, and it could well turn out that everybody is right or was right, but there's certainly no decision made either way as to what the plan is or what's happening. I'll focus on the club season now with Clontibret, and we'll give that our all over the next 6 or 8 weeks, see where that takes us, and then we'll sort of take stock towards the end of December, start of January, see what way the body's feeling, talk to Vinny, and we'll take it from there.
How all-consuming is it? Like, how easy do you find it to switch off? After you lose the Dublin game, are you good at sort of taking a couple of days, or do you still carry it with you everywhere?
No, I wouldn't be great at that now, to be honest with you. Some players are different, and like you see players in within your own dressing room, and some players in other counties are just better at doing that than others. I wouldn't be particularly good at it. I'd be fairly grumpy now for a good long period of time after it. I suppose that maybe comes with age as well, and that chances are running out. So but there's probably an element of that involved with it as well.
Yeah, because I think I was saying that from the perspective of keeping going again. Like, some people clearly they know how to recharge the batteries, but obviously if you're sort of quite intense and you bring it with you, that can be probably quite draining as well in a way.
Yeah, well, I suppose that's just. I suppose what I was saying there was I was probably carrying the defeat with me that particular game, and it takes maybe a week or two to get over it. But once you get past that and you move on, and there's a lot of other things going on, and you do realise there's a lot more important things going on as well. Like, so you have to. It just maybe takes a week or so to get a bit of perspective on it, But you move on, and as I say, you jump into other things, and you get involved with the club again, and hopefully we can give that a good run.
I'm not going to kickstart a Monaghan siege mentality thing here, but there's certainly a lot of conversations across the year, and definitely in the build up to the Dublin game. I think, and I'd said it on air as well, Jeremy Connolly calling it a foregone conclusion, I think was the phrase he used. And I've heard you speaking even since the match, and you're talking about the fact that everyone's going on now like, oh, this was a brilliant year for Monaghan, getting to a semi-final, but I know that's not the way you would see it.
No, like, because at the end of the day we don't have anything to show for it. We don't have silverware, but I suppose, like, at the end of the day, there's 31 other teams that are sitting looking at it like that as well. Only one team can win the All-Ireland, and obviously Dublin done that last weekend, so every other team sitting on looking at that, I suppose, in envy, and we're no different. We had a chance to put ourselves into an All-Ireland final, with 8 or 10 minutes to go against Dublin, and we came up short, just like every other team came up short against Dublin this year. So we certainly progress potentially, you could definitely say that, and you would like to use it as a stepping stone and a building block going into next year for Monaghan, but certainly not a successful year insofar as we didn't actually win anything.
Are you able to watch the final then, or are you looking at it from a Monaghan perspective that should be, or could have been potentially
you've always a wee bit of that in you, the what if, and we could have been there, and there's no doubt we could have been there if we had maybe done things differently in the last 8 or 10 minutes. But again, I go back to it, there's a lot of teams have said that about Dublin and playing Dublin in not just this year but over the last 10 years. They're very good at closing games out, and again they did it last week against the All-Ireland champions who were Kerry obviously at the time. That they beat them, I think, was at 7-2 in the closing stages. So I suppose everybody has that sad story to tell, so we're no different, but we're obviously disappointed with it.
Hindsight's obviously 2020. What would you do differently in those last 5-10 minutes from a Monaghan perspective if you could get them back again?
Yeah, listen, it's very, very small details, very, very small details. Like, Dublin, I think we got it level with maybe 8 minutes to go. Dublin got up and got the next score, and we end up getting caught on a short kick out. With the next kick out, obviously Paul Mannion gets the free. Dublin get pressed up on us again, and they have a real hard press on our kick out. So I suppose it's just the small details that getting out of that initial press on the first short kick out. If we get out of that press, Dublin have a lot of players invested in pressing us at that point in the game. If we just get it out and get it moved across, we probably get up the field and get a shot away, because Dublin obviously had a lot of players invested at that period in the game. So you're looking at really, really small details, but again, they're the small details that add up. And then again, I suppose, as well as that, we turned over too much ball in that 7 or 8 minute period, and Dublin thrive on turnovers, and we would have talked about that before the game.
Mick Fitzsimons was marking yourself. I know you've had many battles with Mick over the years. Many people, I suppose, he could or should have been man of the match for how he helped, I guess, shuffle David Clifford out of the game for all intents and purposes last weekend. What's it like? having Mick marking you, because he's a tight marker, and he's someone you've had unbelievable games with over the years. Like,
yeah, no, listen, Mick Fitzsimons, there's no secret to it. The man is 9 All-Irelands, like, and you don't get that for nothing. Yeah, I've some great battles with him over the years. Some I've come out on top of, some he's come out on top of, and I suppose that's the nature of, you know, cornerback, corner forward relationships. But yeah, listen, he's been a serious servant to Dublin, you know.
Who's the toughest defender you've ever come up against?
Jeez,
there's been a few.
There's been a few. Neil McGee would always be one that would spring to mind. You never got anything soft there. But even in Monaghan training, like, you know, you always had the likes of Ryan Wiley, Colin Walsh, through Wiley, these boys clipping at your heels every night in training, you know, so you were always going into games well prepared. But I suppose the likes of Neil McGee was a very tough one. Mark O'Shea I would have marked, you know, in earlier years with Monaghan. Again, like, he was a kind of player that could you know, be defensive and be as tight and tough as you like, but also go up the field and sell you a shoulder dummy and kick it over with his left foot, like, so he had it all as well. But listen, there's been loads of tough days out, you know.
The Armagh game in the quarterfinal is one I think that live in Monaghan fans' memories for a long time. It was unbelievable, like, just back and forth. I don't think any team led by 2 throughout. It was just one of those exciting games. And then, of course, you're sprung from the bench. Aisling O'Reilly was covering the game for us on the sideline, and she said you were warming up, and I don't know, you were like a cow in spring, nearly trying to get out onto the pitch at that stage, just desperate to be able to do something about it. And when you come on, like, what's going through your head when Rian O'Neill kicks that last score? What we think is the last score for Armagh to win it?
Yeah, well, firstly, you could hardly hear yourself thinking with the noise. Like, the noise the Armagh crowd brought after that particular score was crazy. Like, the stadium was rocking. But you just felt we just need to force one opportunity here, or we will get a chance here. And to be fair, I was running out from Rian O'Neill, having got that score with me back to the play, which isn't, if you're sitting analysing it, it's not exactly what you're supposed to be doing. But before I knew it, Rory had the ball down and Carol O'Connell had the ball taken up the field, like, so we responded very well straight away to that score. We got the ball down, we got possession, and we got an attack going. So once you got an attack going, you felt that you were going to get a chance somewhere along the line, and luckily enough we just managed to squeeze a chance out of it and force injuries or force penalties, wasn't it? Yeah.
How difficult is it as a sub coming off the bench to get to the pitch of a game like that straight away, like a very intense game, you know? And you often hear sports people speak about those first couple of minutes about coming in. It can be a challenge. Like, how is that something you've been able to develop?
Yeah, it can be tricky, because like the pace of them games, you know, and pace of them, you know, quarterfinals, semi-finals in Croke Park, you know, they're all consuming, like, so it can be a tricky thing. But it's, I suppose, when you're in that role, you have to be sort of watching the game and obviously knowing that you're coming in and trying to pick your moments and obviously have a fair idea as to who you're coming on against and things like that. So it's just trying to hit the ground running as quick as you can. Very often just your first touch, things like that there, making sure you nail your first touch, not come on and spill your first ball, and things like that there. So just small simple things like that there, just to get you into the game. Yeah.
Cara O'Kane had a great stats where Vinnie Corey after the match called you the greatest clutch player in Monaghan's history. 9 goals and 240 points at that point in championship football. 143 of that, which is 18%, scored after the 60th minute, and a good proportion of that, 36% from play as well, and that's not even counting the league. So is that something that when it gets to that point of the game, Monaghan are a point down, they're trying to force extra time, you wanted the ball, it was quite clear that you wanted to be the person who got the ball off Rory Beggan or Carl O'Connell, I can't remember which laid it off to you. Bannigan maybe passed it off, but you wanted to be the one to take that last shot, or I guess be fouled, and in the end it was you that was fouled for that free kick.
Yeah, but listen, I suppose that's the nature of your job. You're in there as a suppose a scoring forward, and that's your role, you know. them last 10 minutes, I suppose, are when games are won and lost, you know, particularly in championship football, and it tends to be where things sort of open up a wee bit. You know, you look even last week, you know, from a Kerry point of view, Clifford, I think, touched the ball maybe once in the first 22 or 3 minutes, because the game is often very tight and cagey, and things aren't that overly open. But in the last 10 minutes of them big games, things become a wee bit more chaotic, and opportunities probably do arise. So you just have to be ready when them times do come, you know.
The game goes to penalties then ultimately, and I mean, just the utmost drama. I think it was 17 penalties all in all, 9-8. Monaghan eventually coming out on the right side of it. The nature of the penalties now is you pick your 5 takers, and then if it's sudden death, the same 5 lads go again, which is, it could be deemed harsh, I guess, but it's tough on those lads, especially you know, the Armagh player missed the two kicks. Your 2 penalties were just ridiculous, like top left, top right. Had you practiced them in advance? Was this a scenario you were preparing for?
No, we hadn't practiced them. We talked about it. We talked about it before the Kildare game, I think it was, because that was obviously knockout at that stage. And we decided against it because I suppose, number one, you don't necessarily who's going to be on the field at any particular time, but as well as that, if you're practicing penalties on the Friday night and the game's Sunday and some man misses it, that could be in his head, you know, before he steps up. So I suppose it's a case of who's on the field at any particular time, and then, you know, who has gone well during the game, whose confidence is up and things like that there. So it's a fairly dramatic experience, you know, to be at that level, and you know, in them circumstances, knowing that one miss could potentially see us knocked out here, and I suppose going back to the same 5 players kicking, like I was up first that particular day, and as soon as mine hit the net, I was thinking, right,
that's
happy days, I can clock out here now. And it comes back round a second time, and it looked like for a long time it was going to come back round a third time. So it's a difficult scenario, but at the same time, for any of them players involved in that shootout, there's nowhere else you'd rather be either, like, you know what I mean. That's I suppose that they're the moments that you train for, they're the moments that you want to be involved in, and yeah, listen, I suppose it's a difficult way to lose a game, but ultimately it's probably good entertainment as well for fans and for spectators, you know.
The practicing those penalties and frees, was it yourself saying, someone certainly saying in the past before, who's a free taker in Gaelic football, like when you're a kid out in the back garden, I'm sure it was just repetition. Rory Beggan famously with his dad used to go out and I think maybe try and kick 10 in a row without missing before he could come back inside or whatever else. So was it similar for you in the garden when you were a kid, that this was a
you're always outside till dark, kicking and pretending you're Peter Canavan or pretending you're Mickey Lynn or whoever it was at the time. But yeah, no, absolutely no different. I think every kid's the same, and I suppose that's where the love of the game is born out of, is that I suppose that initial enthusiasm for playing football and that initial love of playing football, you know.
You could see before that kick, and it's a relatively straightforward free from your standards, but in the scenario in which it is, if you miss, Monaghan out of the championship, so there's no easy kick at that.
No, and I suppose that there are things that you, particularly obviously I wasn't starting the Armagh game, so you're visualising bits and pieces coming up to that game, and that's a scenario that you would have played through your head, you know, a last minute free to either win it or equalise it and things like that. So there are things that you would be rolling through your head coming into the game, and you know, practicing before the game, you know, in their last training session, things like that, just trying to have every angle covered that for what may arise, you know. I think it was 2005, was it, that Canavan was in a substitute role against Armagh in a similar position, in a similar scenario, and obviously he knocked it over. Difference was they went on and won the All-Ireland. But yeah, they're the sort of the scenarios and circumstances you would be rolling through your mind, as I say, particularly when you're not starting the game, so you know chances are you're going to be there or thereabouts in them closing stages and be on the field in them closing stages, you know. So listen, that was one of the days that it worked out.
Don't know how much sledging is still a thing, but certainly judging from even the TV pictures afterwards, a couple of the Armagh lads might have had a couple of things to say to you. Maybe they were wishing you the best of luck with your kick.
Listen, you're
are you hearing that at that time?
Not really. No, you're not paying any heed to it at all. Listen, I suppose that's only natural. You, as a player in the opposition's side in them scenarios, you'll say anything or do anything to make sure that this game doesn't go to penalties or make sure that you win the game. So from that point of view, it's totally normal. And from my point of view or the kicker's point of view, you're just letting that all slide, you know.
I know Desi Farrell had said after, not that it was any consolation to yourselves or to any Monaghan fans, but he had spoken about how Monaghan were the most improved team he had ever seen, and I guess he meant that from the Derry game in the Ulster Championship did not go to plan, but then playing Derry in the group stages, you get the draw up in Celtic Park, and the performance was mild different from what it had been against Derry previously. So was that something that you had sat down and discussed, because you'd had the unbelievable win against Tyrone and Ryan O'Toole's late goal, but then the disappointment of the Derry game? So was there a moment after the Derry match where you all kind of sat down?
Well, not one moment as such. Listen, you sit down after every game, and I suppose we would have been very disappointed with our performance against Derry, in the semi-final of the Ulster Championship. After having played reasonably well for half of the previous game against Tyrone, because we were very poor in the first half, that couldn't go unnoticed either, and we just felt that there was, we had to change things, and we had to be better in a lot of our defensive play. And how Derry play, it really challenges you. So listen, the boys trained really, really hard, in that period whereby we were obviously knocked out of the Ulster Championship until our first game in the All-Ireland series, and there was a massive amount of work went on the training field to get ready for that game and the rest of the summer, and you could see it in how we played that day, how the boys applied themselves, and we probably unlucky enough not to win the game, and in the heat of the hunt probably lucky to get a draw out of that particular game, but it's probably solidified what we had talked about and what the boys had worked on the training field, between both games.
Do you pay any heed to the media talk, to what I was calling, suppose, a disrespect towards Monaghan in the build-up, even in our own power rankings? And I'm calling out Tommy Rooney here, who does the power rankings with us, but I think Monaghan finished the power rankings in 5th, and they were in the last 4, of course, in the semi-finals, and I think even when they were in the quarterfinals they might have been 9th. So this is the kind of, and there's always the phrases rolled out about Monaghan, I guess the population is referenced to and punching above their weight. I mean, if you had €1 every time that phrase was used, you'd be a rich man. But do you pay any attention to that, the kind of the media talk?
Very, very little. Listen, some of it's very hard to avoid. If you're on social media and things like that, these things keep popping up, and you do see them. Listen, people have to form their opinions. That's part of media. That's part of punditry. Some are right, some are wrong, some are very wrong. But listen, that's part and parcel of it, and that's. I don't think from a player's point of view, yes, it'll be spoken about maybe here or there, but you'll never hang your hat on it, or you'll never hang too much attention on it. It might be referenced maybe once or twice, some certain thing that may be said or done, but by and large you can't be like, what's important is what's inside the 4 walls of your dressing room, and if you allow that stuff into your psyche or your mindset on a constant basis, you're not really focusing on what you need to be. So yes, obviously that there's a lot of the media now is hard to avoid, you know what I mean. Before, if you didn't buy a newspaper, you wouldn't see anything, you know what I mean, but now it's everywhere, and some of it's hard to avoid. So yes, you do see it, but you don't really pay much heed to it, really, Sorry to say that.
No, it's grand. In the off season you can watch.
But I suppose that's the benefit of your experience. But can you imagine for a 20-year-old now, 21-year-old who's never known it any other way? Is it harder for them?
It probably is, and like, I suppose that's where working with obviously experienced managers, say the likes of Vinny, who's been there and through it all, or you look at other dressing rooms, you have obviously Jack O'Connor, who has been through it all, Desi Farrell, so players can lean into that, and obviously all sports teams and all Gaelic teams have their own psychologists and things like that, so younger lads can really tap into that and I suppose learn from it and bounce their own thoughts and ideas off these people as well, so that's what that's all there for and geared towards as well. But I suppose having been there for a period of time, and you come to learn to handle these things and cope with these things in your own way, and don't necessarily need to bounce it off people as much, because you've been there, and you can lean on your own experiences more. So
not to bring you back to the whole thing about your future, but I'm just curious. Like, I mean, clearly,
but you're just gonna.
There's another Euro.
Here we go. But no, it's not even that. It's much like people talk about longevity and keeping going. Like, how much do you enjoy the winters? Like, as I imagine, like the summer and the big games, and it's clear, like, that's the buzz, that's the thrill, that's what you grew up dreaming about. But how do you find the December, the January, that sacrifice? Is that the hardest part of it, as opposed to being there in the summer? I mean, of course, it's obvious appeal.
If you talk to some of the boys in the dressing room, they say, I don't. Decembers and Januaries haven't troubled me too much in the last while now. But it is difficult to navigate your way through them seasons, and obviously I have to just manage the injury or the hip a wee bit more. So I'm not out doing that slog in December and January this last number of years. But even when you're not doing that, you're in the gym and you're doing your rehab and you're doing your own conditioning, and it's testing. It definitely is, like, because the more you want to be out on the field, you want to be training now, as tough as they are in them times of the year. That's where you want to be, is on the pitch with the boys and going through that slog, and it can be difficult. There's no two ways about it. I've yet to meet any inter-county footballer that has played that puts his hand up and says he enjoys that. It's a necessary evil. It has to be done, and you're just trying to get yourself back in shape and get a base level of fitness that will sort of carry you through the season. But that can be the challenge. There's no doubt.
Like, it's always there, even if you're not out there. You have that responsibility that's always there.
And as well as that, I suppose Gaelic footballers over the last number of years are coming back into pre-season in better shape, because the sort of the lifestyle just rolls from one year to the next, whereby you're always tipping away in the gym and keeping yourself in shape and things like that. So there's not the same grind coming back as maybe there used to be whenever I would have been involved first with Monaghan, whereby you'd have men coming back in and they were a stone and 2 stone overweight. Darren Hughes being the exception to that. He does that every year. But like more often than not, players are coming back in fairly good shape, and it's not as big a grind, but it still doesn't make it any easier. You still have to get through that 6 or 8 week block, and it's tough. Hope
Darren's watching this morning. He'll enjoy that one. Does it, when you eventually make that decision, ultimately to keep going or not going, as you say, it'll be the body and how you feel later on in the year. Maybe does Vinnie Corey being in charge have an impact? Because I mean, he's clubmate of yours with Clontibbert, he's a good friend of yours as well, so I'd imagine if there's anyone going to be in charge to convince you to stay on, it would be Vinnie.
Listen, it will, I suppose I'll not make any decisions without talking to Vinnie and having a chat with Vinnie, absolutely, because obviously number one, he's the manager, but as well as that, you have that relationship. If he wasn't the manager, he's the kind of guy that you would probably be bouncing things off anyway, you know what I mean, regardless. So he absolutely will. He'll be a factor in that, and he'll be somebody that I'll be chatting to before and during the thought process. And listen, it's not something like you nearly get fed up talking about it, and people ask you, and you go back over the same things, and you're talking about injury and your hip and all this here, and you're conscious that but even from my own point of view, you're conscious that you just, people are sitting listening, oh geez, will you give it a rest with this hip, you know what I mean? So it's something that I'll not give too much thought to at the minute, and we'll see where things are at sort of December, January time, and we'll give it every chance anyway.
Do you like the current or the new championship structure? I get having the All-Ireland final in July feels a bit strange, but how do players like it? I guess you get a bit of the summer.
I personally don't like it.
Right.
I think the season is far too condensed. We had the structure is okay, like the round robin series probably worked reasonably well. There was some entertaining games towards the back end of it. There was some not so entertaining games. but by and large, I think the structure of it is quite good. But I think we've done a total 180 on it from, say, where the championship used to finish on the third Sunday in September. We've just completely gone, against that and crammed it far too much. I think somewhere in between, maybe end of August would be a reasonable compromise, because at the end of the day, you're only really affecting 4 teams that are going to be in that latter stages. Every other club in the country can crack on. Like our championship isn't starting. We're out of obviously the All Ireland Championship now 3 weeks at this stage, or 2 weeks, and our championship doesn't start for another 2 weeks. So it's not as, you couldn't say that we're under major pressure, So and I just feel that we've taken the GA out of the shop window somewhat. The build up to these big games used to be a 2 and 3 week build up, and there was so much content around it. You're really only getting over the All Ireland hurling final on the Monday, the Tuesday, and all of a sudden you're getting straight back into the football final on the following week. So I definitely think we're selling ourselves short there. Players could have a wee bit more of a gap between some of the big games, and I'm not saying this specifically because it happened to us this year, whereby we were in the last 12, and then obviously we had the quarter final the following week. But by and large, teams should have more time to get ready for big All Ireland quarter finals, All Ireland semi finals, and that. So I definitely think there's something that can be done to elongate the season a wee bit more and space it out a wee bit.
The other controversial one, I guess, is and we had Davy Burke sitting in here recently in studio, and he was lamenting the attacking mark and saying, he was at a game earlier in the year, and I think he said Conor Callahan catches the ball in the full forward line and just takes his mark, instead of back in the day would have obviously taken on the defender and possibly had a goal chance. You're obviously a player who utilises and makes use of the attacking mark consistently and get a number of scores, even in the semi-final from the attacking mark. Do you like it?
I'm all for it. No, I can see both arguments. It does slow the game down, and it can take away from, I suppose, some of the attacking plays, and that we don't know what would happen because the game automatically stops, and it's players are taking their point. But as a result, I suppose it's come in as a result of a lot of defensive systems and teams getting 10 and 12 and 13 players behind the ball. So I do feel it maybe keeps defenders a wee bit more honest, at times where you can't really stand off your player as such, because there's the threat of an attacking mark. So it does maybe put a wee bit more onus on man-to-man defending or one-on-one defending as well. So I can see why it was introduced. There's arguments to and for and against it. I don't think it has had a massive bearing on the game. How often does it get used altogether? Maybe 2 or 3 times in a game. So I don't think it has a massive bearing on the game.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I personally like it as well. It's at times, and sometimes when if strikers in the full forward line, it can kind of take away from the game. But I do see both points of view. Conor, brilliant with your time.
Thanks, yeah.
Look after the hip, look after the body. Hopefully come back. You should have seen the state of me now on the night of the All Ireland semi final. I was in the pubs, the nightclubs of Monaghan, of course, celebrating the year that was, drowning the sorrows. Had at different points of the night, I think I bumped into you at one stage, bumped into Darren Hughes, and bumped into Carl O'Connell, 3 of the veterans of the Monaghan team, of course, and I think I said the same thing to him: just leave it, just give us a bit of time. I think I speak for all Monaghan fans when I say, look, you make the right decision for yourself anyway in the end of it, and hopefully from Monaghan perspective it's a good one for us as well. So thanks many, Conor, for coming.
All right, Shane.
Much appreciated as always. That is Conor McManus with us. If you missed any of the chat, of course, you can get it back on the podcast or the YouTube channel as well. Dan, great stuff.
No worries, Shane.
Thanks for hopping in with us today as well at 9:35 AM on Thursday mornings, OTB AM. Should mention tomorrow's show as well. It'll be Adrian Barry and it'll be Johnny Ward with you. Back with Vinnie Perth talking the Irish in Europe. We've more build up to the Camogie final as well, and of course Ireland versus Italy in the Rugby World Cup warm-up game, and plenty else besides. Right now, the best of the World Cup show. Personally, I'm off to a festival this weekend. That's all together now down in Waterford. So
modern culture, Shane. We've spoken
modern
about
culture.
this,
It's modern culture.
You've done Oppenheimer, you've done Barbie. Now you're just going to do a festival.
Do the whole lot.
Yeah.
We should give a shout out as well to your sister, Conor, Kathy. I met her in the pub last weekend, and she's getting married tomorrow.
Spend a lot of time in the pub, Shane.
I know this doesn't come across too well. I'm just chatting to people.
It sounds like you're just walking around Monaghan talking to people. I'm not sure if they all appreciate it.
Just looking for stories. Just looking for stories. Constantly.
So wedding, big day tomorrow. So we'll get home and get the suit dusted down.
It's Kathy and what's the husband's?
Matthew.
Kathy and Matthew. Met them last weekend. Lovely couples. Best luck to them in their married life, and best luck. Have a good weekend as well. So I'll have a good weekend at the festival, no doubt.
Enjoy.
Have a terribly good Thursday, everyone. Thank you.
Now then, the World Cup is progressing without Ireland, as we know. We're into the knockout stages, and I suppose an interesting area to pick up on is that this was billed in advance, rightly or wrongly, as USA being the team to beat, going for an unprecedented third World Cup in a row, 3 in a row, and they're not setting the world alight. They have Sweden in the round of 16 on Sunday in Melbourne. Sweden, obviously a very good team. Very happy to say Sandra Herrera of CBS is with us. Sandra, thanks for the time.
Happy to be here. Happy to chat all things women's football with you.
So I mentioned there, rightly or wrongly, the tournament was billed in advance as Team USA versus everybody else. How fair was that at the outset, do you think? Was that, they're going for 3 in a row, a more experienced team, the age numbers are creeping up, but still it felt like they were the team to beat. Is that how you guys saw the tournament in advance?
Yeah, I would venture to say that, there was a little bit of a maybe 60-40, 70-30 kind of angle there. I think when it comes to, being the number 1 ranked team in the world, the reigning champions, longevity within these tournaments comes that kind of layer of expectation and pressures when you go into another World Cup. So absolutely, I think that was there for this United States squad, especially considering their draw that they got with other teams in Group E. But I also think there's another eye towards kind of the expanded field of 32 teams in this tournament as a whole, knowing with all of those expectations that this was also probably going to be the most challenging, difficult World Cup for these players.
So the group stages thus far, USA started in fine fashion against Vietnam, who are 32nd in the world. They beat them 3-0. Sophia Smith scored 2 goals. Lindsay Horan scored a goal. Next up, it was the Dutch. It was a 1-1 draw. Horan scored the only goal of the game, or the only goal for the US. And then I suppose where eyebrows were raised, without overstating things, was against Portugal. 0-0 draw. USA, by all accounts, very, very poor. Portugal hit the post, and that could have knocked the US out, which would have been really quite something. They got away with it, and now they have Sweden in the knockout stages. So how disappointing have the US performances been thus far?
Yeah, I don't think that's unfair framing, at all when it comes to this team and the American audiences who are looking at it, or European audiences who maybe expected a bit more from this number 1 ranked team in the world. And I think historically for this United States national team, they have kind of prided themselves on growing stronger as tournaments go on. And maybe there's perhaps still a little bit of that element for this team as they now look ahead to the knockout rounds. But just narrowing that lens on the group stage, they got off to a good start. They went out and won the game that folks expected them to win against the debutante Vietnam, and went toe-to-toe with Netherlands, who are another top 10 ranked team in this tournament, and fell short of scoring and kind of looking like a lethal attacking team against another debutante side in Portugal. And there's also a counter argument to take a look at and see how other national team programs have sort of taken that next step a little bit and ensured that there are resources and development that's happening for their national team programs. And I think Portugal is a very, very good example of that, finally cracking through and breaking through to their first ever World Cup and really playing this United States team just in 2021 and held them to 1 goal even back then. So to sort of see things in this particular match against Portugal, I think there's a layer of why didn't they come out with all 3 points and where have the goals gone? But also looking at Portugal, like you said, just inches away from the possible biggest upset of all time in Women's World Cup history. And sometimes I think we can both agree that the soccer gods smile upon teams, and sometimes it's not your day. And I think obviously if that goal does happen, we have a little bit of a different discussion in this one, but it doesn't. And now this United States team, everything that they're saying out of this group stage, they're already putting that behind them and trying to look ahead to this next knockout round.
Yeah, it was interesting after the Portugal game. The match was on Fox Sports, and the camera cut to the US players signing autographs, but also doing a bit of dancing, a bit of singing, and former US captain Carly Lloyd was in the Fox studio, and I'll play the clip. She wasn't overly enamoured, I think, with the Carry On. Have a listen.
I have never witnessed, and just seeing these images for the first time right now on the desk, I have never witnessed something like that. There's a difference between being respectful of the fans and saying hello to your family, but to be dancing, to be smiling. I mean, the player of the match was that post. You were lucky to not be going home right now.
Boom. Now we're talking.
Yeah, absolutely. She was fired up after that one, right? But look, you're talking to someone who I love smiling and dancing personally. So I know I'm in a different position than a former player who's maybe being very reactive, right, immediately towards a lackluster performance by a team that she had spent a long time with. And, you know, we've got Carly Lloyd now almost about 24 hours later apologizing and or clarifying some of her reaction and statements that she made that night. And I think, you know, perception is reality for a lot of people. And I think you have, again, a former prolific player in Lloyd who was very reactive to that. And maybe someone like me or someone else who looks at that and sees players who are trying to essentially keep a good mindset together. When I see, you know, a Crystal Dunn or an Emily Sonnet, you know, cracking jokes or doing a little bit of dancing or interacting with fans and or family, to me, that's just ensuring that they still have that mindset in place going forward. You got to have a short memory. I think, you know, if you're a professional athlete trying to navigate a World Cup tournament, we hear that so often from pro athletes that you can't dwell too long on those kinds of moments, especially in a World Cup tournament in which the turnaround is very, very quick. So it doesn't surprise me that Lloyd was very reactive in that moment, but it also doesn't surprise me that she has had time to think about, you know, her own comments on the team moving forward, you know, saying that she deeply cares about the program. And that is kind of where that all stems from going forward. And honestly, it's a bit of a moot point because there are actual things on the pitch that this team has to figure out ahead of their game against Sweden.
Yeah, we won't dwell on it overly, but I do have the second clip of Carly Lloyd. Obviously, her initial reaction must have generated a bit of blowback. So here she is subsequently, as you've alluded to, maybe rowing back a touch. Have a listen.
Well, I'd like to state that obviously I was very critical of the team last night. I've had some time to reflect, to sleep on it, and I want people to understand that I care deeply about this team. I poured my heart and soul into this team for 17 years. And it was based off of a legacy that was just passed down from generation to generation. The mentality, the DNA of what makes that team so great. And so my comments were reflective on me wanting to see that legacy continue to be passed down from generation to generation. And with that, it comes with hard work. It comes with focus. And so my hope is that that continues, because that is what makes the U.S. so special and so deadly. And that is what ultimately has won us championship.
So that's fair enough. You can understand that point, I suppose, Sandra. I mean, there is lots of experience when Carly Lloyd's talking there about the generations handing down the culture to the next generation. I mean, Megan Rapinoe is 38 years of age. Alex Morgan is 34 years of age. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's just a degree of the kids these days, and that's just fine as well, you know?
Yeah, no, I hear you. I think that's part of it, right? I think that's something that these veterans have kind of embraced a little bit as well. They know that they've got a lot of first-time World Cup debutants of their own on this team. While we're celebrating, this World Cup and how it's expanded to 32 teams and how there's now 8 debutant teams to have celebrated during the group stage, but the United States themselves have 14 players who had never gone through this experience. And we hear a lot from these veteran players, some that I've spoken with, and Alyssa Nair specifically, in wanting to take on some of that pressure for those younger players and for those inexperienced players, and how important that is to play that role as a veteran player. So when I see, again, a Crystal Dunn or Emily Sonnet, dancing, or a Kelly O'Hara kind of giving a bit of a put your chin up kind of speech to this team, these are examples to me of veterans who are trying to absorb some of that pressure that maybe these first timers are not used to navigating.
Yeah. So, I mean, from the outside, I just wonder, as happens with any country when they're navel gazing and focused on their own performances, how serious do you think this is? Because it's one particularly bad performance against Portugal. They're probably entitled to that. They could very easily go on and win this competition, and this will all be a distant memory. And lots of teams who do win the competition start slowly and warm up as it goes on. How worried are you about the Sweden game? How deep-rooted are the problems, do you think, Sandra?
Oh, there's absolutely problems. I think, again, that's absolutely fair criticism for this team. I think you and I are speaking a bit about the Portugal game in terms of recency, but I would, also argue that these problems have been on film now for their last couple of group games. I mean, we saw both Portugal and the Netherlands target weaker areas of this team on the pitch, and it's pretty blatant that there are some huge question marks in that middle third right now for this United States women's national team. We've seen oppositions go ahead and try to counter that with numbers and try to expose some areas there, and it has worked. It has worked out in their favor. It led to an early goal for Netherlands, and it nearly worked out for Portugal in this final match day. And I think the struggle coming out of losing that midfield battle is we're not seeing the plan B. We're not seeing the adjustment from a team that we're so used to, seeing make those adjustments. Where are they coming from, and how is it going to look moving forward? And if I'm Sweden, the blueprint is there at this point to go up against this United States side. So I think there's an understandable level of concern that, again, comes with all of those expectations as a reigning champion and a number one ranked team. And that is absolutely on head coach Vlatko Andonovski's plate. That is something that he and his coaching staff are going to have to try to figure out and address moving forward. Okay, so there is great trepidation about Sweden on Sunday then. Look, the history between these two teams have always been close and tense. It's going to be their 6th overall meeting between each other. So there's familiarity between the history of these two countries. But the United States have a little bit of history on their side in that they've had, I think, 3 of the wins, one going by way of a draw between the two of them. But I think what makes this next coming game so intriguing is the fact that there are so many new players for the United States. For them, it will be perhaps their first introduction to a rivalry like this, and it will be because Andonovski is going to have, to make some forced adjustments here. There is going to be no Rose Lavelle available in this game after picking up an additional yellow card, and she will have to serve suspension there. So what will happen in that midfield trio? Or will we see a change in formation to try to really shake things up against Sweden? I think that's possibly the best bet for this coaching staff moving forward. I mean, in the 2019 World Cup, the United States played in a 4-3-3. It was what they did. And in that quarterfinal against France, they shaked things up a little bit to kind of close out and ensure the win. And at the end of the match, former manager Corinne Ducric said that was something that France was unprepared for, to handle the switch in formation and switch in tactics from the United States because of what all of the footage that has been out on this United States team. So I think with everything that's been out there in 2023, I think Sweden will feel a sense of confidence, but they are also of the understanding that this is a team that can strike at any moment. So I think it'll make for wonderful knockout soccer, and probably a lot of broken hearts for the betting kind.
Okay. Did I read as well, Sandra, are the team, or certainly a fair quotient of the team, not singing the national anthem? If that's true, what's that about?
I don't know if they're not singing it, and I'm not someone who is going to try to humor the concept of anthem discourse. I think it comes from a targeted, specific sector of Americans who are looking to seek out division where there shouldn't be. Players are participating in the anthem respectfully, and the ways in which they want to pay homage to the anthem ceremonies. And as far as I'm concerned, that should be a non-topic.
Yeah, but am I right? Are a bunch of them not singing? Is that a topic elsewhere?
There's been nothing on record from players saying I am refusing to sing the anthem. There's been nothing on record from players saying that.
And if I was to observe them during the anthem, are they all not singing?
No, there's definitely a mix of players who have eyes closed and want to sing harmoniously. There are others who are focused and locked in. It's a team of individuals, and perhaps it's showing in more ways than one, right?
Yeah, okay. I hadn't seen it personally. I had just read that point, so I wasn't sure to what extent it was the case. And that's not blown up into some kind of talking point stateside anyway, has it?
I think there are folks who want to try to make it a talking point. Okay. But as far as I'm concerned, if there's nothing coming out from players specifically, why highlight a talking point from created by others who want to create discourse?
Okay. Which team has impressed you most then? Who are the favourites for this World Cup all of a sudden?
I think Japan is absolutely up there in terms of a team that can really disappoint and surprise and upset some other teams along the way. I think they have been put in a group alongside Spain, and they've played some competition that others consider below them. So maybe they're going to get their first real shot at playing up to competition in the knockout rounds. But I still think that they play a very lovely style of football, tactical on the ball, smart in their movement, and will really make things difficult no matter who they're going up against in the elimination rounds. Look, I've had Colombia as a dark horse going into this tournament as well. I'd love to see them continue being, successful. I thought they had a phenomenal, gutsy, historic performance against Germany and ended up pulling off the win. And I hope they continue to maybe have some more surprises along the ways. But in terms of a favorite, I'm looking at Japan. I'm also looking at England as a team that is probably the definitive example of utilizing the group stage to peak at the right time. So a couple of nervy performances from the Lionesses themselves, have lost Keira Walsh, but obviously closing out their group stage with a massive blowout win is the type of temperature you want to have going into the next round. So I'm looking at Japan. I'm looking at England as maybe some contenders, and Colombia is maybe my dark horse.
And I guess this is a point which is probably made about each successive World Cup, but this is the biggest, the most viewed, the most attended, another step forward for the game. Has it impressed you in general terms, Sandra? Has it been what you hoped this World Cup would be so far?
Oh, absolutely. And, thank you for the framing on the question, because I think leading into this particular tournament, there's, with any World Cup, Women's World Cup specifically, there's always been discussion about the United States as their favorites or contenders, or really some other European giants like Germany or France or England. The emphasis on these quote unquote contenders, right? But I think this is the first World Cup where, going into it, having the expanded field to 32 teams, the 8 debutantes, that there was a little bit of unexpected layer there. Like, is this the tournament where we're going to finally see some real big upsets? And I think this is the tournament that's actually delivered that. I think that there's been a couple of group games, and hopefully we'll continue to see this in the knockout rounds. But there's been some group games that have kind of introduced national team programs to the world. I think folks can get often fixated on the ratings of teams, and we're now going to see Nigeria, Colombia, South Africa, Jamaica as national team programs who have exited their group and are going to continue to compete for the possibility of a World Cup title. And I think if you found yourself as someone very fixated on a number or ranking of a team, that you're finding a lot of surprises here along the way. And for those of us who have maybe had to be a little deeper into women's soccer, maybe we aren't so surprised, but it is so nice to kind of see all of these things come to fruition and see the surprises along the way.
And just the last one, I know you'd be very familiar stateside with Denise O'Sullivan, but Sinead Farrelly, I'm curious to what extent, if at all, I mean, every country is very focused on how they're going themselves. Has her return to football in a big way and playing 90 minutes at a World Cup and featuring in all of Ireland's games, has that caught the eye of the media over there? Had any traction? Because certainly it's been a big part of the Irish experience supporting this team.
Oh, absolutely. I think going into this World Cup, Ireland was a team that left their mark on the hearts of Americans. They were the last team that the United States had faced in an April international window ahead of the World Cup. And this was billed by U.S. Soccer as the final pair of friendlies before the 23-player World Cup roster would be named. So there was a lot of eyes and attention and fixation on these games. And Denise O'Sullivan has been a player who has also played in NWSL for a very long time. But the return of Sinead Farrelly and her story and back to playing professional soccer, I think has been a big story for folks who are invested in the game. Having gone through unfortunate, terrible circumstances and trauma during the early days of the National Women's Soccer League, and bringing these allegations to light, and then taking some time away from the pitch, and then eventually working her way back in to club play and finding herself playing in a World Cup. I don't know if any of us could have written that in our wildest dreams, but Sinead Farrelly went out and wrote that for herself. So, there was a lot of attention and a lot of excitement from Americans for Ireland, I think, as they went off into the World Cup. I'm local to Chicago, and there is an NWSL women's professional club here. And they have a United States national team player who unfortunately fell short of making the roster. But Tierna Davidson at one point was walking into a game day with her Ireland kit, and she had the jersey on and representing it. So there was a buzz about this team, and it's unfortunate to see them fall just short. I think I mentioned earlier about the football gods, right? And I think this was one of them. They unfortunately got put in a draw where it was a very, very tough group to get out of. But I think it was lived up to the billing, because they're a tough team themselves, and I think they showed that throughout this World Cup.
Sandra, we're out of time, but we'll be tuning in now to USA, Sweden, expecting something pretty interesting and tense. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Cheers. Sandra Herrera there of CBS Sports with us from Chicago. And the Women's World Cup show on Off the Ball is with thanks to Sure Non-Stop Protection Deodorant, official sponsor of the FIFA Women's World Cup 2023.
OTB AM.
The Sports Breakfast Show from Off the Ball.